The story begins with the continent's previous sword god Yulan saying that he was successful because he put in 99% of his effort. The main character's name was Yi Xiaobai. This year he turned 16 years old, and his cultivation reached the 8th rank. The master looked at the book while the guy tried to attack him, and he asked if he had eaten enough. The master had a cultivation that had reached the 9th rank of Sword Saint, and right now, he was training Xiaobai. The guy fought off his master's attacks, but it was very difficult for him and he had to put in a lot of effort. The master said that since Xiaobai couldn't stop even one of his hands, she didn't train enough and reminded him that he needed to make more efforts. The guy's eyes lit up and he was full of determination. He gathered all his strength and shouted to cope with someone else's attack. And at this moment, Xiaobai was able to repulse someone else's attack, and his whole body was shrouded in energy, and he made a breakthrough. The master closed the book and said that Xiaobai had finally broken through to the 9th rank of Sword Saint. The guy felt enormous power, and the master said that at his age he improved faster and now the guy would face real difficulties. The master broke through to the 9th stage 300 years ago and still has not crossed the threshold, and on the continent, no one has reached the 10th rank for a long time. The master began to say that the guy must be strong in heart and first prepare his mind for difficulties. But Xiaobai was already at the center of a huge amount of energy and was making a breakthrough to the sword god level. A huge beam of energy was sent straight into the sky and touched a mountain that stood nearby. The air around the guy was filled with lightning and energy. Xiaobai had a sword in his hands and was about to strike. So the guy took a step forward and slammed his sword into the ground, releasing even more energy. The master watched this and could not believe that his student had reached rank 10 so quickly. Due to the fact that the blow was of enormous force, the mountain on which it fell began to rapidly collapse. At that moment, Xiaobai heard the screams of his master, who said that the student had decided to kill him. The man stood on shaking legs and asked to quickly dissipate the energy, otherwise he would not have lasted long. The master began to laugh and say that the guy was worthy to be his student and would not have achieved this without the master's instructions. Xiaobai was surprised because the master talked about difficulties and that after 300 years he had not broken through, and the guy had not encountered any obstacles. The master shouted at the guy to shut up and not dare to teach him. Xiaobai apologized and didn't know how he achieved success. After this the guy was forced to cook. Xiaobai believed that his masters would definitely be punished by heaven for this. Xiaobai finished preparing dinner and went to the table to give the dish to the master. But instead of the master, he found a note on a tree. The master said that he had taught him everything, and now it was time to separate. The guy was shocked when he read that he was offered to find another master at the Elvia School of Magic. Xiaobai called his master very loudly and his cry echoed in the endless mountains. A group of various beings agreed that if the old man refused to return the holy beans, they would take his life. After that, they saw Xiaobai running not far from them and shouting for the master to wait for him. The man with horns realized that this was the old man's student and asked where he was running, and the white tiger was sure that they were running away from them. The leader of the company decided that the tiger was right and ordered everyone to run after him, and the pursuit of Xiaobai began. The guy quickly moved forward and continued to shout loudly and call for the master. He asked where he was, but there was no answer. Suddenly, behind him, Xiaobai heard someone screaming and calling for help. The guy turned around and listened to the screams. The girl pressed herself against a tree and asked the bandits not to approach her, but the armed guys were not going to listen to her. The guys came closer and said that they did not look like bandits and would be gentle if the girl obediently followed them. The girl said that she was the granddaughter of the head of the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce and if they tried to harm her, they would face consequences. The bandits laughed and said that it was worth it to sleep with her, especially since they had already captured the caravan. The girl pressed herself against the tree and again screamed for help with all her might. The bandit said that there was no one here, and she was trying in vain. The girl tried to protect herself from the approaching bandits and just at that moment Yi Xiaobai appeared nearby. The guy decided that first he needed to smile and say hello, therefore, he attracted the attention of bandits. The bandits turned to the guy and were very unhappy. They asked where he came from and if he wanted to save her. Xiaobai showed a portrait of his master and said that he just wanted to know if they had seen this man. The bandits were sure that the guy was using this as a trick and were aggressive. Xiaobai bowed and apologized for interrupting him. he said that now they could continue and made the bandits very surprised. One of the bandits approached the guy and noticed that he was quite thin and gentle, and the second guy laughed at his brother. Xiao Bai pointed back and asked what was flying there, but the bandits did not believe him and decided that he just wanted to deceive them. The guys were laughing at the guy's stupid tricks when a huge fireball appeared behind them. The tree under which the girl was sitting broke, and she covered her ears, pressing herself against the stump, and could not understand what was happening. There was a huge amount of fire around and everything was flying in different directions, and the girl thought that she would die here. The tiger said that the guy could have died and then they would not have known where the old man was, and the other man apologized for his incontinence. The girl realized that she heard sounds around her and opened her eyes, and realized that it was a miracle that she remained alive. Xiao Bai asked why they were flying so fast and said that it was dangerous to fly at such a high speed, and then he pointed to two skeletons and said that these good-natured guys died because of them. A man with horns, since he was able to defend himself from this attack, he is worthy to be a disciple of the Holy Sword. And then he demanded that Yi Xiao Bai tell them where his master had gone. White Tiger noticed that the guy's cultivation was at the Sword Emperor level, and he could handle it alone. The guy with the wings became worried and said that his attack would seriously harm the Sword Emperor, but the leopard believed that he did not have enough strength. The girl saw 5 sacred beasts, because of which people did not dare to go to the mountains for 1,000 years. But they were not seen for a very long time, and now they appeared for the sake of the guy. Xiao Bai asked to apologize for what he had done. The white tiger told the guy not to change the subject and tell him where the master was who stole their treasure. Xiao Bai asked what kind of sacred beings were they. It turned out that these were the treasures of heaven and earth, which were necessary to break through to the divine level. And the chief beast said that only 2 beans can grow in 5,000 years, so they are extremely valuable. The white tiger said that the old man took the sacred beans 3 days ago, he lied to them and did not pay for them. Lord Tiger moved closer to Xiao Bai and said that if they did not give up the beans, then he would show them what it was like to live while wishing for death. Ariana greeted the sacred beasts and pushed the guy away and asked him to let her ask him. The white tiger calmed down a little and allowed the smart girl to take the guy away and talk to him. Ariana whispered that the animals were looking for another person, so the guy could lie to them, and she asked not to anger the animals. Xiao Bai said that the master was going to go to Elvia's magic school and find something there, so they need to go north. The white tiger asked what they would do next, and the boss turned to leave and said that they would follow him. The sacred animals were leaving when Xiao Bai asked if the beans looked the size of potatoes, shiny and speckled. Ariana panicked and asked why he was telling them this, if it was better for them that the animals would leave quickly. The boss stopped and turned sharply towards the guy. He asked if Xiao Bai knew where his master kept the sacred beans. Xiao Bai awkwardly rubbed the back of his head and said that the master brought them 3 days ago, but he thought they were potatoes and ate them. Ariana watched the guy tell the sacred beasts that he ate their treasures and thought that he was a fool. The sacred beasts could not believe their ears that Xiao Bai had simply eaten their sacred beans. 5 pairs of eyes looked at the guy in rage and thought about what they would do to him now. Ariana tried to run away while Xiao Bai talked about how he doubted his culinary abilities because of the strange taste. The leopard was very angry and could no longer control his anger. He concentrated his energy into his paw and rushed to attack. Ariana screamed and tried to run away from the place where a serious fight was brewing. The smoke after the impact began to clear and the animals discussed that they should have asked the guy first in case he had any beans left. The smoke cleared completely and Xiao Bai told them that there were no sacred beans left because he had eaten them all. Ariana and the sacred animals were shocked that the guy was alive. The leopard couldn't believe that the guy dodged the attack. Xiao Bai looked at the leopard and asked why he needed to dodge such a sweet attack. The leopard shouted that the Sword Emperor would never be able to withstand his direct attack. Xiao Bai said that he was not at the Sword Emperor stage, it was just that the master asked him not to talk about his cultivation status. After this, the guy instantly became serious and confidently stated that he was now at the Sword God stage. The sacred beasts couldn't believe that the guy was at the Sword God stage, and they looked at him in surprise. And then they couldn't stand it and started laughing because the guy could say such a stupid thing. Ariana said that he would not fool his opponents and offered to apologize, and the guy agreed that it was worth listening to the master. The white tiger cried with laughter and said that Yulan had not appeared on the continent for many years. And while the tiger was laughing at his ridiculous attempt to deceive them, Xiao Bai had already disappeared and the tiger was pointing towards the stump and Ariana. Xiao Bai flew from above and shouted that they were stupid if they considered themselves strong and thought that he did not have enough strength. The guy with the wings realized with horror that Xiao Bai's voice was sounding right above him. The guy shouted that they were just a bunch of animals that could talk, and he was ready to start a fight. And when Xiao Bai struck, it was so strong that there was an explosion of enormous force. Phoenix was defeated, and the sacred beasts tried to understand how the guy could defeat him so quickly. The guy was the source of a fiery whirlwind, and everyone around him began to understand that he was truly at the sword god stage. Ariana was surprised because countless geniuses had failed to reach the sword god stage, and this guy was very young. The boss was furious. He pointed at the guy and said that despite his stage, the sacred beasts would still tear him apart. The white tiger not confidently noticed that now there were only 4 of them, but the others did not listen to him and agreed to attack the guy. The leopard ran forward and shouted for the guy not to hide and to fight him on equal terms, since he was so strong. His eyes glowed blue, and lightning of enormous power was concentrated in his clawed paws, and the leopard attacked screaming. He sent all those lightning bolts straight at Xiao Bai, using all his sacred beast power for this strike. Xiao Bai stood still and had no intention of hiding. He could parry a blow of such force with just one blow of his sword. Therefore, when the guy sent a blow with his energy towards the lightning beam, they dissipated, and Xiao Bai's energy continued to move forward. The leopard was shocked when he realized that his strongest blow was easily repelled, and he himself now stands in the way of a very strong attack. The leopard came to his senses a little and managed to jump to the side in fear, barely dodging the guy's blow. He screamed in horror as he turned around and saw that Xiao Bai's attack had split the mountain into 2 equal parts, as if it was nothing. The leopard froze and no longer wanted to engage in battle with the guy, because he realized that he could not even realize how big the gap was. The snake decided that along with spiritual strength it was necessary to use a physical attack. The most important thing was to concentrate the blow on one point. He was confident of success, since he was able to greatly accelerate his body and his impenetrable scales gave him an advantage. However, Xiao Bai repelled the snake's attack without even using a sword. The guy remained indifferent and said that the snake talks a lot. At that moment, a white tiger appeared behind the guy and shouted that the guy hadn't taken something into account, and he attacked the guy with his claws. The boss saw this and praised the white tiger for thinking to hit Xiao Bai in the blind spot. The guy continued to stand with his back to the tiger, but was completely fine. Smoke was flying around him as the impact was really strong. But it turned out that instead of harming Xiao Bai, the white tiger broke its claws and looked at its hands in panic. The white tiger felt terrible about his broken claws, and the guy turned to him and asked him if he was Meow Meow. The white tiger fell to his knees in front of the guy and Xiao Bai began to stroke him and call him Meow Meow. The boss saw this and couldn't believe that the guy actually dared to humiliate the sacred beasts. He shouted that he would not tolerate such an attitude from the guy, because it was unbearable, and began an appeal. A huge, strong dragon's tail appeared from under the man's cloak, and soon he took off into the air. The boss turned into a huge dragon that roared at Xiao Bai from the air. He was furious and wanted to fight. Ariana was scared, and Xiao Bai admired the beautiful black dragon. The white tiger watched this and thought that now everything depends on the boss. The black dragon flew even higher, and a huge spiritual force began to gather around it, and the guy watched this from the ground. Ariana screamed that the spiritual power was too scary and they needed to hide, and the white tiger couldn't believe that the boss was going to use that technique. The black dragon opened his mouth and the lightning around him began to gather into one large lump, intertwining together. Xiao Bai said that the dragon deserves to be a leader if he can control so many lightning bolts and asked if his tongue was going numb. Naturally, no one answered him, and the black dragon collected even more lightning to complete the technique. And when all preparations were completed, he used the forbidden technique of the sacred beast, which was called Thunder Breath. The ball of lightning flew straight towards Xiao Bai. The white tiger wanted to run away, but the guy managed to grab him by the tail and hold him next to him. Xiao Bai took a stance and prepared to deflect the ball of lightning that the black dragon sent at them. And after that, He raised his sword up and sent it to meet the ball of lightning, which the black dragon fired at him. The dragon hovered in the air and continued to channel its spiritual powers to attack. His attack looked stronger than Xiao Bai. However, Yi Xiao Bai had no intention of retreating and looked confident in his abilities, and he continued to channel his spiritual powers into the ball of lightning. The lightning ball and Xiao Bai's spiritual energy met in the middle, and the ball of lightning let the guy's energy beam into itself. Xiao Bai's spiritual power concentrated in a beam of energy destroyed the ball of lightning from the inside, and approached the black dragon's body. And in the next moment, Xiao Bai's spiritual energy beam completely dispelled the other's attack and pierced the black dragon. After the spiritual forces dissipated, the black dragon began to lose altitude. There was a huge hole in his body. The black dragon opened its mouth and blood poured out from its mouth due to the huge wound on its body. Yi Xiaobai watched the black dragon fall and decided that since he won anyway, he would save his life. On the other hand, Xiaobai understood that everything happened because of him, since he ate those 2 potatoes, and the dragon fell with a roar. The leopard treated the boss and asked him to forgive them for their mistake, and the black dragon said that he did not specifically attack the sword god. Xiaobai leaned on the white tiger and said that they must control themselves, regardless of whether they are people or animals. The black dragon cried and said that they apologize for the 2 dead and sincerely thanked the guy for his forgiveness. Xiaobai stroked the tiger and said that for such a mess the animals should somehow compensate him for this, since words alone are not enough. The black dragon agreed and said that they were ready to give him Meow Meow as a gift, and the white tiger could not believe it. The guy was very happy and began to hug the tiger and say that now Meow Meow is his pet. The tiger cried that he was the almighty white tiger. Suddenly the tiger heard a message in his head. The boss told him to be patient while they tried to kill Xiaobai again. The boss was very angry, so he asked the tiger to lure the guy into the western forest. He was sure that the guy would not be able to get out of the restricted area. He said that now everything depends on the white tiger of the underworld, and after these words from his boss, the tiger was ready to do anything. He stood on all fours and began wagging his tail when he suggested they go look for the master. Ariana said he looks a lot like a dog. Xiaobai turned to the girl and asked her name and if she would like to go with them, since her companions had suffered such a misfortune. Ariana introduced herself and shyly said that if the guy insists, then she can go with them. And when the girl looked up, she saw the guy and the tiger leaving. They were going to go and cook some fish for the white tiger. Ariana started running after them and screaming that they had forgotten her, and the sacred beasts watched them go, and the leopard asked if their plan would work. But the boss replied that the leopard should not worry, because their great god lives in the western forest. The guys reached the western forest when night fell. The forest was shrouded in fog, and the branches rustled due to gusts of wind. Ariana and the white tiger pressed against the guy from different sides. Xiaobai told them that he was not very comfortable going like this. The girl and the tiger were trembling with fear. They asked the guy to be quiet because they heard the dead crying. Xiaobai asked his companions not to worry so much. He pointed up and said that these sounds were made by birds. Ariana and the white tiger looked at the place Xiaobai was pointing to and were convinced of the veracity of his words. On one of the highest branches there actually sat a bird that sang melodies that reminded them of the cry of the dead. The girl said that the petioise was very beautiful and asked what kind it was, but the white tiger didn't know and asked the guy. Xiaobai did not have time to answer them, because the bird turned the other side to them, and they saw that it was mutilated. White tiger and Ariana screamed in panic and fear, but Xiaobai stood calmly behind them. Because of the very loud cry of the tiger and the girl, all the birds that had previously been sitting on the branches left their places and surrounded them. Xiaobai looked at the birds carefully and said that they were very cute, but his companions did not agree with this. Ariana covered her ears and shouted that these birds were watching them and they should not have entered this forest at all. The white tiger trembled with fear and said that he just wanted to take a shortcut, and he himself hoped that God would leave him alive. Xiaobai asked if they didn't like the forest, and Ariana fell to her knees and screamed that there was no point in it because they weren't getting out of here. The guy reached for his sword and took it out of its sheath. He began to concentrate spiritual power and said what they should have said earlier. After that, he made one blow and admitted to his companions that he also did not really like it in this forest. The blow that Xiaobai delivered with his spiritual power caused a huge wave of fire that burned everything in its path. The wave of fire moved deep into the forest until it crashed into the mountain with a deafening roar. Xiaobai was pleased and said that he had solved the problems and now they are not afraid. Ariana and the tiger couldn't believe their eyes. In the sky above the forest, among the thin fog and sparkles, a small orange ball could be seen, and Xiaobai asked if his companions were feeling better now. Instead of a forest, in front of them there was a scorched strip of land. The white tiger began to cry, because the forbidden forest had existed for tens of thousands of years, and the guy simply destroyed it. Sparks from the burnt trees flew in the air as the guy said it was time for them to go, but the tiger began to resist. But his cries that he did not want to leave were interrupted by an unexpected strong gust of wind, and everyone raised their heads. A circle of spiritual power formed in the sky above them, and Ariana said that she felt something bad was about to happen. The white tiger was happy and thought that the god of beasts had finally arrived to them and now their plan would work. A portal opened from a ball of energy and someone's silhouette appeared from there. He asked how the pathetic boy dared to destroy his forest. Ariana realized that they had entered the forbidden forest of legends, into which even sacred animals do not enter, and the tiger watched everything from the side. A huge black silhouette with horns and an axe began to scream. He asked how they dared to disturb the deity, and then he shouted to them that they would die and rushed to the attack. The girl was very scared, unlike Xiaobai. The deity swung his sword, which quickly increased in size and struck them from above, without leaving the portal completely. The blow fell over a large area, and the white game was thrown aside from the stone on which he was lying. The deity looked down carefully and realized that, despite the explosion of the area around, something had gone wrong. The deity tried to lower the sword and fully touch the ground, but felt resistance and realized that he could not do this. When the smoke and spiritual power cleared, the deity saw that the guy had stopped his sword. Xiaobai asked why he was so weak. The white tiger lay on the ground not far from the epicenter of the fight and tried to ask the god of animals to destroy the guy. But the tiger did not have time to finish, because the deity was furious because the man called him weak. He raised the hand in which he held the weapon, put in even more strength and rushed to attack again. However, Xiaobai was surrounded by a shield and said that he was giving the god 10 seconds where he could use all his powers. He began to count, but then asked God to forget about it. He said the enemy was too weak for that. And when the previous attack dissipated, he raised his arms with his sword up and directed his blow at the portal. God saw that a powerful attack was approaching him and was confused because he had never seen anything like this before. Since the god of beasts did not dodge because of the portal, the beam hit him directly and the silhouette in the sky immediately disappeared. The sacred beasts were returning, and the leopard was not sure that they had done the right thing. The serpent said that he did not want to anger God. The black dragon was sure that they should have prepared an offering, but they should not have left the guy alive. Their conversation instantly stopped when a very bright flash of light appeared behind them. A ray of light rushed into the sky and illuminated everything around so brightly that it seemed as if it was not night outside at all. The animals turned around and realized that the forbidden forest was in the same direction. The boss happily decided that the guy was destroyed. But the leopard noticed that the guy's energy was felt in the beam. The dragon released the unconscious phoenix he was dragging along. And I realized that the leopard was right and this beam was created by Xiaobai. Their plan failed and the dragon couldn't believe it. After some time, the beam of light went out, and the area was again illuminated by the moon and stars. It became very calm around. Xiaobai said that he must have become too strong, since he provoked him with one blow, and Ariana could not believe what happened. And while she was asking if it was really a god, Xiaobai noticed that the tiger was not nearby. He turned to find him, and he saw that the white tiger was trying to get away from them unnoticed. He asked where Meow Meow was going, and the tiger rushed to hug Xiaobai. He thought that the guy was very strong and the only way was to travel with him. Their happy atmosphere was interrupted by a loud voice asking how the boy dared to destroy his divine body. A huge portal began to appear under the guy's feet and a voice shouted that it would teach him a lesson. Afterwards the portal disappeared, but a hole appeared under them. Ariana and White Tiger panicked as they fell into the unknown. They screamed and flew down for a very long time. The hole turned out to be too deep and led as if to another world. Soon they were thrown out through another portal. the white tiger and Xiaobai hit each other painfully when they fell, and the girl helped herself with magic. Ariana ran to the guy and apologized that her magic control was too low and she could not help them. Xiaobai said that he was not injured and raised his head to look around, and I was very surprised. Ahead there was a huge number of different bones, as well as huge swords sticking out of the ground. Xiaobai continued to sit on the ground, looking around, and then he asked his companions where they had ended up. The guy got up from the ground and began to walk forward, stepping on bones. He asked if this was an ancient battlefield. Ariana said that she read about the war between demons and gods 10,000 years ago, and Xiaobai decided that this was the site of that battle. The guy was unhappy and did not understand why they were kidnapped and sent to this strange place. The girl said that they needed to get out somehow and the guy suggested making another hole. Tiger wasn't sure if this was a good idea, but Xiaobai was determined to try to get out of this place in this way and hit the ceiling. However, despite all its force, nothing was damaged, and the only trace of the impact was smoke. Xiaobai tried again, but realized that there was some kind of barrier in this dream that was blocking his attacks. Ariana was worried that even Xiaobai couldn't break the barrier, and the tiger kept looking around, waiting for the dragon god. The guy stood on a huge skull and said that he would definitely come up with something, but asked the guys to stay away. When he finished speaking, he saw that Ariana and Igri were pointing at something behind him in a panic. Xiaobai turned around to see what scared them so much and was very surprised when he saw it. Right behind him was a huge dragon skeleton that was overflowing with spiritual power. Xiaobai was impressed because he didn't think he would ever see a moving skeleton. Ariana screamed that the skeleton was possessed by a spirit and asked if it could be the dragon god who disappeared 1,000 years ago. The white tiger was very happy and mentally asked the Lord God of Dragons to save his relative. The huge skeleton rushed to attack. Xiaobai managed to dodge, and the beast broke the skull on which he was standing. After that, the skeleton opened his mouth and started shooting balls of energy at the guy while Xiaobai was still in the air. The guy did not expect that such an attack would take the enemy so little time, and he understood that he would not be able to dodge in a jump. The white tiger ran to the girl and shouted that it was the explosive breath of a dragon, so they should lie down. After this, there was a deafening explosion in the air, in the place where Xiaobai was a second ago. Ariana and the white tiger lay on the ground, covering their heads, and the girl created a magical barrier to protect them. Ashes and sparks flew around Ariana, but the skeleton no longer attacked, and the girl looked up. She looked at the fire and thick smoke in front of her and asked the tiger where Xiaobai was. Because of the smoke they could not see anything. After that, a skeleton's head appeared from the thick smoke, but Xiaobai was still nowhere to be found. The white tiger was delighted and began to shout that the god of dragons had finally won, which greatly surprised Ariana. But then the skeleton's head fell to the ground, the smoke cleared and they saw Xiaobai, who was asking why Meow Meow was happy. The white tiger could not believe that an unharmed guy was standing on the head of the skeleton after such an attack. The tiger fell to the floor, and Xiaobai asked if he was injured, but the girl explained that his faith had failed. A strange voice intervened in their conversation, saying that now he understood why the guy behaved like that in the forest. A purple cloud of energy appeared next to them again, and a voice said, "Xiaobai is really worth paying attention to." The white tiger immediately came to his senses and was surprised that the dragon god appeared only now. Ariana considered this behavior suspicious. Xiaobai looked towards the portal and asked in surprise who this voice belonged to. The face of a man with thick red eyebrows, a mustache and a beard appeared in the portal. He allowed himself to be called Lao Chu. The armored man then completely exited the portal. He had claws on his hands and horns on his head. This was the god of dragons. Xiaobai bowed and apologized for disturbing him. He asked to let them go as he was hurrying to the master. The man said that it was possible, but he was bored here, and the guy was a worthy opponent with whom he would like to fight. Xiaobai was surprised and realized that the man also could not get out because of old age and asked if he was lonely. An awkward silence fell between them as the dragon god did not answer this question. After this, the man put down his sword and said that he would fight with the Qing Gang sword, which he got after defeating the Sword Saint. Ariana noticed that the man had not answered the previous question, but the tiger was sure that God was not lonely. Xiaobai also decided to talk about his sword. He said that his name was Xiao He and he found him at the foot of the mountains. The dragon god shouted that it was time to start the battle and threw Qin Gang towards the guy, attacking him. The sword flew straight towards the guy. Since the dragon god could control it from afar, Xiao Bai stood motionless. He looked at the approaching Qin Gang and prepared to parry the blow when he flew close enough. Xiao Bai chose the right moment. He struck and Qin Gang shattered into small pieces right in front of him. The dragon god was delighted with such an interesting opponent and prepared to test him further. Xiao Bai agreed to play, and said that he hoped the man would tell them about the exit when they finished. Lao Chu started laughing loudly and said that he was very interested and was ready to start the fun. For more swords with different elements appeared in the air and Lao Chu was about to attack the guy with all the swords. He shouted that he was attacking and the swords of fire, ice, earth and thunder flew to attack Xiao Bai. Ariana shouted about the legend that the dragon god collected the swords of his opponents with different elements. And if the sword collides with the opposite element, the sword will break. Xiao Bai hit the fire sword and it shattered. After that, he easily parried the blow of the thunder sword and smashed it too. This surprised Lao Chu. A sword with the earth element appeared right in front of the guy, but it also shattered into pieces from Xiao Bai's blow. The only hope remained in the form of a sword with the element of ice, but he too was defeated in a fight with the guy and his sword. Lao Chu was shocked because the guy had defeated all the swords, which meant that Xiao Bai had the rarest dark element. The guy shouted that he didn't know anything about it, but Xiao Hei was a good sword. Lao Chu was delighted and said that he was surprised. A sword, which was the only weakness of the dark element, began to appear in his hands and was happy to complete the collection. Lao Chu shouted that with the help of the sword of light he could defeat Xiao Bai and ordered the guy to continue the fight. Ariana was outraged that the dragon god took into his collection a sword that was useless in all battles, except for this case. But Xiao Bai was not going to retreat because of this and ran towards the dragon god to continue the fight. Lao Chu swung his sword and shouted that he was going to attack from above and cut the guy's sword. Yi Xiao Bai and Lao Chu met with swords and a very bright light began to emanate from their blades. This collision created an explosion that forced the opponents to disperse in different directions. Xiao Bai helped himself to slow down with his hand and shouted that Lao Chu was very strong. The man laughed and said that the guy had to give it his all before he lost. Since the dragon god said that he had not enjoyed a fight this much for a long time, Xiao Bai said that he was very proud of himself. Lao Chu again placed the sword in front of him, preparing for the fight, and asked him not to let him down, but he did not see that the sword was cracked. The next moment, the tip of the sword fell off and fell to the ground, despite the fact that he was only stronger than the dark element. Lao Chu looked at his feet in shock, where a piece of his weapon lay and couldn't believe it. His sword of light could not cope with Xiao Bai's power and began to fall apart right in his hands. The dragon god looked at his weapon in panic and did not know what to do next. If even this sword failed. The man fell to his knees in front of a piece of the sword and began to scream that the ancient sacred sword of light had been damaged. Xiao Bai said that apparently this was not enough to win and ran to Lao Chu to continue the fight. The dragon god stopped his blow and began to ask the guy to wait and not attack him. The white tiger was happy and supportive of Lao Chu, and Ariana noticed that Miao Miao didn't understand what was happening. Xiao Bai struck again, and another piece of the sword of light broke off, causing the man to panic. The dragon god began to scream when he saw that only the hilt of the sacred sword of light remained in his hands. Yi Xiao Bai raised his hand for another blow and asked the man to let him know when he would give up. After that, he hit the unarmed Lao Chu with such force that the man's dentures flew out. Ariana watched the fight and was delighted that Xiao Bai was motivated even against a sword that had advantages. The white tiger realized that the dragon god was losing and began to cry because he could not help. But despite this, the white tiger decided that he would still support his master until the very end. The dragon god hid behind a large stone and started shouting that the guy had knocked out his denture and angered the old man. The guy asked if Lao Chu wanted to continue, and he said that he would use the forbidden curse. The girl and the white tiger began to shout that Lao Chu should not do this, since it would not work. But the god of dragons was not going to retreat and began to make a call to the Lord of Light. Ariana felt the tension and was very worried about how this battle would end. The white tiger also froze and expected to see what Lao Chu's strongest forbidden curse looked like. Yi Xiao Bai closely watched the old man's actions and expected to see another strong attack. But instead of the expected amazing performance, they received complete silence. Ariana asked what happened. And then they saw an old man running away, who asked them to wait until he recovered. The girl asked if it really was the ancient god of dragons. Xiaobai said he didn't know, but it was interesting. The guy decided that he would try again to destroy this barrier when the white tiger called him to the exit. Ariana and Yi Xiaobai turned in surprise at the sound of the tiger's voice, and the guy asked where he found it. Meow Meow joyfully pointed to a wooden sign with the inscription exit and showed the hole under the skull. The guys asked if the white tiger himself had written this sign, because the ink was still fresh. Xiaobai pulled back the skull and saw that there was actually a pit there, and although it looked suspicious, it was worth a try. The girl asked what if it was a trap, and the guy jumped down and said that then they would see what she was like. Ariana told the guy not to blame them later if he really fell into the trap. The dragon god held a brush and a bucket of paint in his hands and was preparing to show the guy his wisdom. Xiaobai, Ariana and Meow Meow found themselves at the bottom of the pit. There was a strange blue room around them. In the center there was a stone with some blue lines extending from it, and a huge seal was drawn around it. The white tiger said that he knew that the stone needed to be activated using internal energy. Xiaobai wanted to do it himself. But the white tiger said that he is one of the sacred animals and now wants to show what he is capable of. Meow Meow touched the blue stone with his paw and said that it would simply inject some internal energy. The light suddenly turned pink and the white tiger screamed that this thing was quickly draining his energy. The pink light grew brighter and the white tiger began to scream as the energy rapidly drained into the stone. The guy and the girl started running towards him, and Ariana said that they need to stop this urgently or he will die. Xiaobai ran up to the white tiger and began to pull it strongly towards himself, but Meow Meow said that the formation was about to break. The guy wanted to destroy the stone pillar, but Ariana said that then something terrible could happen. The girl noticed that the pillar was gradually catching fire and they needed to pour more internal energy into it to get out. Xiaobai said that it would be easy for him, despite the fact that a lot of internal energy is needed. Ariana couldn't believe what she heard and didn't understand how simple it could be. Xiaobai stood behind Meow Meow and said that he would help him. The guy touched the tiger's back and began to transfer energy. The white tiger sensed someone else's internal energy and screamed even louder than before. Ariana saw that the stone pillar continued to light up and shouted to the guys that everything was working. Xiaobai transferred even more internal energy to the white tiger and said that he was ready to give as much as he wanted, even all of it. The seal around the stone pillar was already almost completely burning pink and Ariana shouted to the guys that there was very little left. And after a short amount of time, the entire seal glowed with a bright pink light and was filled with someone else's internal energy. When they finished the seal and the stone pillar lit up with a golden light and the guys were glad that they had succeeded. Xiaobai was worried about Meow Meow and asked how the tiger was feeling after such an ordeal. The white tiger felt very tired and was shaking all over, but he told his owner that he was doing well. The dragon god watched as a bright blue light broke through the pit where the exit was located. He cried from the realization that after 10,000 years he would finally be able to leave this terrible place. The stone pillar glowed with a bright blue light after enough internal energy was infused into it. And then the illusion of a man appeared who laughed at the god of dragons. He asked how long he had been sitting here. The man said that he hoped that after this long time, Lao Chu had become kinder to people, and the guys listened to the message in surprise. Ariana realized that this man had imprisoned the dragon god and was a very strong person. The message was coming to an end and it turned out that you only need to say a command to return to Earth. And the man solemnly shouted that the god of dragons needs to be told, "Dad will, I beg you, let me go." The guys felt very awkward, and everyone thought that this man was cruel. Xiaobai felt awkward, but he understood that this was the only way to leave this place, although he didn't want to say that. And just as he was about to say this, the god of dragons called them and the guys turned around at the sound. Lao Chu looked very sad and said that he did not come to fight, but to ask if they would take him with them. The dragon god promised that he would owe them if they took him with them, and the guys were confused. But they gathered quickly enough and realized what they needed to do. They looked at each other and smiled wickedly. Xiaobai approached the man and said that they were friends, so they would help him just like that without any debt. The guy became serious and said that he had a request with which Lao Chu could prove his sincerity. The dragon god was ready to do anything if the guy was so kind and was going to take him with him. Xiao Bai said that the request was not difficult at all and Lao Chu just needed to read something out loud. The guy pointed to his friends, who were holding pieces of paper with a password that would allow them to leave. The dragon god read that he would have to beg Will to let him go, and couldn't believe it. He became very angry, and Xiao Bai said that there was nothing difficult in this, shouted out one sentence and found himself free. The dragon god's eyes glowed red and the man began to shout at him to shut up and not dare to ask him for such a thing. Xiao Bai became serious and asked if the dragon god really didn't want to fulfill such a simple request. The guy raised his sword and said that then they would leave Lao Chu here and asked how he even dared to shout at him. The man apologized and said that he lost his temper when he remembered his battle with the strongest man. He spoke with tears in his eyes about the loneliness he had experienced throughout all these thousands of years. And then he cried harder. Xiao Bai consoled the old man and said that he just needs to say these words and they will go out. Meow Meow and Ariana watched this and the girl said that sometimes it seems to her that the guy is worse than any demon. The tiger agreed with her, and Lao Chu mentally decided to leave all the grievances behind and get out into the wild. He thought about how he no longer wanted to remain the invincible dragon god, he wants to leave this place and enjoy life. Therefore, despite all his resentment, Lao Chu gathered himself and shouted. He begged Will's dad to let him go. Xiao Bai hugged the crying dragon god and said that he could cry some more and then it would become easier. After the words were spoken, the stone pillar activated, and blue lightning headed towards the ceiling. Happy Xiao Bai grabbed Lao Chu by the hand and dragged him towards the exit to the real world. The dragon god looked at the sunlight and couldn't believe that he could smell that wonderful smell again. It was the smell of freedom, and the man happily ran towards it, leaving his cage. When all those imprisoned left this place, everything around lit up with a bright white light and soon disappeared. The dragon god stood in the middle of the forest. He looked around and did not believe that he could get free. Xiao Bai appeared behind him, carrying a girl on his shoulder and pulling the tiger's tail. It turned out that they had lost consciousness. The dragon god asked the guy not to leave and began to look for the gift in his sleeves. Lao Chu said that he wanted to thank the guy. The gift turned out to be a guardian spirit ring that the old man discovered on an ancient battlefield. Xiao Bai accepted the gift. He said that it was not at all necessary, but thanked him anyway. After that, the guy began to leave, took his friends with him and said goodbye to the old man. The dragon god watched with a smile as the young sword god moved away and thought about what he would meet the guy on the way. Ariana began to slowly open her eyes and very slowly come to her senses. The girl sat on the tiger's back and asked what happened. Xiao Bai said that during the transition she lost a lot of strength. Ariana asked where the god of dragons was and the guy said that the old man decided to stay in the mountains for now. The girl was listening to the guy when she suddenly felt a strange wave of magic approaching them. The magic moved very quickly, and with every second they had less time. The girl shouted at the guy to hold his breath and that bandits were attacking them. But it was too late, because the next moment there was an explosion around them. Ariana screamed that her caravan was stopped by a similar magical smoke that affects the human psyche. She put a shield around and asked not to inhale it, but turned around and realized it was too late. The sword god and the sacred beast were fast asleep, and the girl thought that it was unfair that he was stopped with the help of a magic scroll. Ariana felt that the bandits were approaching and realized that her strength was not enough to stop them. She decided to pretend to be asleep and hope that the bandits would not kill indiscriminately. Almost immediately, a crowd of men appeared among the trees and approached their victims. One of them was very pleased when he saw who they had caught and said that they were lucky to have stumbled upon a woman. The bandits were wondering where the tiger and the guy came from. They decided that they were protectors. At first they wanted to take only Ariana, but then they realized that they could take everyone and make money. Ariana thought about their words and tried to understand who hired the bandits specifically to find her. There was a huge skull on the street, it was surrounded by a fence in some places, and there was fire for lighting. The man invited his friend to have dinner, but the guy reminded him that the boss had ordered him to look after the prisoners. The man said that he was leaving alone then, but the guy ran after him because he didn't want to be alone and was also hungry. Ariana and Xiao Bai remained behind bars, but now there was no one in the corridor to look after them. When the girl realized that their guards had gone far enough, she carefully opened her eyes. And after that, she immediately began to wake up Xiao Bai, because this was the only way they had a chance of salvation. The guy was fast asleep and only became indignant in his sleep when the girl shook him violently. Ariana decided to use a trick and whispered in the guy's ear that while he was sleeping, she found his master. It took effect instantly, and Xiao Bai immediately opened his blue eyes, as if he had not slept a second ago. He sat down on the floor and started shouting for the girl to show where the master was, but Ariana covered his mouth with her hand and asked him to be quiet. After that she told what happened, and Xiao Bai couldn't believe that they were caught by bandits. The guy realized that he didn't have a sword and asked if Miao Miao had run away. It turned out that the sword was taken away and the tiger was locked in another place. Xiao Bai thought this was outrageous and was about to free them with spiritual power, but the girl stopped him. Ariana explained that she heard from the bandits that her caravan was deliberately attacked, and if you wait a little, you can find the culprit. Xiao Bai looked at the girl in surprise and asked why she was alone if the whole caravan was attacked. The girl said that she was from the number 1 Chamber of Commerce and when they were passing through a mountain pass they were ambushed. The bandits used magical fog to neutralize the guards, and only she was able to escape. The girl knew if her uncle Brewster was alive. Ariana trembled and said that she must find the traitor who leaked the information and take revenge on him for everything. That's why Ariana wanted to ask the guy to help, but Xiao Bai covered her mouth and said that someone was coming. Soon several men appeared near their cage. One of the bandits told his deputy chief that they had caught them. The guy came closer to the bars, pointing at Ariana and asked if he wanted to catch her. The deputy chief was wearing a mask. He folded his arms and said that everything was correct and he wanted to catch Ariana. He ordered the guy to take the girl out of the cell and take her to someone, and the guy began to open the cage. The girl was carried away by 2 guys and began to leave with the boss, and the man allowed the guy to keep Xiao Bai for himself. The guy was very happy. The deputy chief asked how long the girl would be unconscious and the guys said about an hour. Ariana understood that she was being led to a traitor and hoped that Xiao Bai would come to her aid in time. She hoped that Xiao Bai would not fall asleep again. The man next to him was talking about how handsome the guy was. He turned his back to him and began to undress, anticipating how he would soon enjoy himself, but Xiao Bai was already standing behind him. Having neutralized the bandit, Xiao Bai took his clothes and was now adjusting his mask, which was very uncomfortable. Xiao Bai didn't understand how the bandits wore them because he couldn't see anything in that mask at all. Suddenly, a guy appeared from around the corner. He carried a small box in his hands and asked Lao Wang what he was doing here. Xiao Bai panicked a little and lied about going here to take a leak. It was the only excuse he could come up with. Immediately after these words, the guy hurried to run away from the bandit, who knew the real owner of the clothes. The bandit watched the guy quickly disappear from his sight and thought that something was wrong. But then he decided that Lao Wang was simply enjoying the handsome guy they had caught. The deputy chief came to the door of the house and said that he had brought Ariana. He asked to go out to them and have a look, and the girl lay motionless on the ground. After these words, the door creaked open, and a beam of light could be seen emanating from the house. Ariana opened her eyes and tried to see from her place who exactly ordered to catch her. It was an adult man with a scar on the right side of his face. He promised to send the reward the next day. The deputy chief said that he trusted Mr. Brewster, and Ariana realized that it was her uncle. The man said that the girl would not be able to escape and ruin his plan, since the goddess of fortune had not turned her back on him. Ariana stopped pretending to be asleep and attacked Uncle Brewster with a wall of flame, preventing him from approaching. The man laughed and said that the girl was worthy of the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce if she dared to enter here for the sake of truth. Ariana was very angry and was ready to use fire magic. She said she wasn't prepared for him to turn out to be a traitor. She wondered why he would do this, and the man said that it was all because of the old man, who chose his older brother's daughter instead of him. The man shouted that the old man had no right to choose a stupid girl instead of him. Ariana was shocked. And the man blamed the old man for his rudeness and said that now he needed to get rid of Ariana, and he suggested that she do it herself. Ariana couldn't believe all these words and started screaming that Uncle Brewster couldn't do that to her. She recalled how as a child he took care of her, took her fishing and taught her to ride a horse. The girl recalled how Uncle Brewster received his scar while protecting her on one of their travels. But the man just looked arrogantly at the girl and told her that she was stupid, and all this was part of his plan. Ariana cried because she couldn't believe that all the care she felt from her uncle was not real. The man created a sword and ordered the girl to come to him, since he needed to return to the old man. But Ariana was not going to give her life to such a person so easily and began to attack with fire magic. Xiaobai ran along an empty street and tried to remember the girl's name and understand where she was taken. Just at that moment, a few houses away, he saw a pillar of flame rise and realized that he had found her. Xiaobai decided that the girl was most likely in the same place as the fire and began to run towards him. To make sure he didn't get lost, Xiaobai decided to go straight and destroy the houses that prevented him from passing, and soon he heard a scream. It was Ariana. Her uncle cut her shoulder and she couldn't help but cry out in pain. The girl began to retreat, but tripped. The man said that Ariana was a burden for the Chamber of Commerce and they should have gotten rid of her earlier. Uncle Brewster smiled broadly and told the girl that he was now going to correct his mistake. The girl sat on her knees and attacked the man with a fireball, but it was useless because the man dispelled her attack. Uncle Brewster was about to strike the decisive blow and shouted to the girl to prepare for her end. But he was unable to finish what he started, because a strong gust of wind forced him to plunge his sword into the ground in order to stay on his feet. And the next moment the girl disappeared, and the bandits did not understand where she had gone so quickly. One of the bandits saw Xiaobai with a girl in his arms on one of the towers and pointed up to show everyone where she was. Xiaobai held the girl in his arms. He called her Ariana and said that he was just in time. The bandits were surprised that Lao Wang was so fast and protected the woman, but their deputy chief realized that this was a different person. He pointed at the guy and ordered him to immediately confess who he was and what he was doing here. Xiaobai wanted to introduce himself and tell the bandits everything they asked, since they were interested. But Uncle Brewster appeared behind him and shouted at him to die no matter who he was. The man's blow destroyed half of the building on which Xiaobai stood with the girl in his arms. The deputy chief was angry that the man had ruined their work and screamed for Brewster to compensate them for the destruction. Xiaobai managed to dodge the blow and was now carefully descending with the wounded girl to the ground among the trees. The man put the girl on the floor and asked if her own uncle was really a traitor. Uncle Brewster was not far from them and said that it was stupid of the guy to act like a hero without understanding the situation. The man apologized to his sword and said that he would immediately feed Long Yin the boy's blood. Ariana recognized the sword that was stolen 3 years ago, and their guild suffered losses, and her father had to apologize personally. Uncle Brewster ignored the girl and told the guy to get his gun because things were getting serious now. Xiaobai said that he would look back now, because he definitely saw her somewhere here. Ariana asked what he was looking for. The guy walked away a little and said that he had already found it and bent down to the ground. Ariana didn't understand what he found there. Xiaobai picked up a stick from the ground and proudly boasted of his find to the rest of the battle participants. The stick was long enough and the guy introduced himself as Meow Meow and said that he was ready to start the battle. Ariana suggested he bury him like a tiger or something similar, and her uncle was completely shocked by this situation. Uncle Brewster closed his eyes in irritation and said that it was time to drop the formalities and finally start. The man began to run and shouted that he would give Meow a quick death. He pointed his sword straight at the guy. Xiaobai defended himself with a stick and the man said that he was stupid if he hoped to win with a broken stick. Ariana was worried about the guy and said that her uncle was a cultivation genius. She thought that Xiaobai couldn't handle an ordinary stick. Uncle Brewster said that today he would demonstrate the technique that he had been training for almost half his life and the guy would be honored to die at his hands. The man raised Long Yin to strike with the cut of the great dragon, and at that moment he was wounded by the enemy's stick. While Uncle Brewster was talking about how stupid the guy was to rely on a broken stick, Xiaobai was able to calmly injure him. The man looked at the wooden stick that was sticking out of his chest and couldn't believe it, and Xiaobai stood opposite him, still wearing the bandit mask, and said that the man was too weak. Uncle Brewster's mouth began to bleed, and he wanted to say something to Xiaobai. The man fell to the ground and called the guy names, and Xiaobai was unhappy that the man was cursing in such a situation. Xiaobai gave the sword to Ariana and told her to take it, and the girl thanked her for saving her. Suddenly they heard the voice of the deputy chief. He ordered to put the sword on the ground and not go anywhere. The bandit said that Brewster did not pay and now the girl must pay the ransom herself. Ariana looked at the bandits doubtfully and asked if they were sure that the three of them wanted to attack. The deputy chief laughed and asked the girl to look around, because they were in the center of the base. After that, the man ordered the sixth to call people and Ariana and the guy looked around in surprise. The man said that their goats are numbers and even if Xiao Bai is a master, he will not be able to defeat everyone. The man laughed loudly, but when he turned around, he saw that there was not a single new bandit around. The bandits could not understand why no one was coming and thought that everyone was sleeping. Xiao Bai destroyed all the houses while he went to save the girl and injured almost all the bandits. Xiao Bai easily dealt with the three remaining bandits, and they begged him for mercy. The guy leaned over to the main one and told them to immediately return Miao Miao and the sword. The boss had the dark sword. And the tiger, as it turned out, was stewing in the kitchen, and Xiao Bai became furious when he realized that they wanted to eat him. Suddenly Xiao Bai sensed something very dangerous and realized that it was approaching the girl. He left the bandits and ran to shield Ariana with himself. The lightning strike hit Xiao Bai's back. The girl became very worried when she saw smoke coming from the guy's back and did not realize that he had been wounded. The bandits were glad that their boss had returned and asked for help to deal with the guy as soon as possible. The chief of the bandits was a very tall man and he was wearing huge armor. He held Xiao Bai's dark sword in his hands. The man was very angry that the base was destroyed and said that he would crush everyone's bones so that they would feel like a living corpse. The man couldn't say anything more because he was surrounded by the bright light of Xiao Bai's spiritual power. And nothing remained of the bandit chief except the dark sword that belonged to Xiao Bai. The sword began to fall from the roof. And the guy easily caught him, and she said angrily that anyone who would use other people's things will deserve a hell of a death. The bandits saw that their boss was defeated in a second and felt despair. The evil Xiao Bai ordered him to be taken to the kitchen and his sheath brought to him immediately. The bandits were already badly beaten and scared, so they immediately agreed to carry out the order. Xiao Bai opened the door that led to the kitchen and shouted that he would save Miao Miao. In the kitchen, he saw that a white tiger was lying in a large basin and did not look at all like one who needed saving. Miao Miao was completely relaxed and was relaxing in the water along with various spices. Xiao Bai and Ariana froze, and the girl said that it seemed to her that the tiger liked everything. Xiao Bai sniffed and said that it smelled very tasty, but the girl began to shout at him, which seemed to him. She said that we need to hurry up and go look for the master, and the guy went to get the tiger. As they were about to take the tiger out of the water, someone called out to the hero behind them. These were three bandits who carried out his orders. They knelt before him and asked him to stay with them. After that, he didn't start actively bowing, knocking their foreheads and shouting for the guy to become the boss. The bandits said that their ancestors had been farming near the mountains for many years. But a few years ago bandits appeared, they burned houses, killed people, so they had to flee. Later they met the chief and he was able to unite them to oppose the bandits. So all these people became bandits in order to survive. They had to take this path. The residents were able to defeat all those bandits and became the strongest group in the area under the control of the chief. But now other groups find out that the boss is no more. They will try to destroy them. Xiao Bai felt awkward. Xiao Bai sat on the throne and all the bandits begged him to become their leader. They bowed to him and hoped so. The guy asked Ariana what to do. The girl believed that it was better to get rid of the bandits, since they killed all the caravan guards. The deputy chief stood up and said that they didn't kill anyone except the commander-in-chief guard and just locked them up. Ariana was delighted when she heard that almost all the guards were alive, and she asked if it was true. It turned out that they were indeed locked up. Despite the fact that Brewster asked to get rid of them, the guards were glad to see Ariana. Xiao Bai noticed that all the guards were wearing only underwear, and the girl was too happy to see the guys. She started crying when she was sure that they were, in fact, okay, and she told them that she was very happy. Ariana ran to the bars and said that she was very worried, and the guards replied that they were also worried about Miss. Xiao Bai burst into tears when he saw such strong devotion and the tiger asked the guy not to exaggerate. The guy wiped his eyes from tears and called the deputy chief. At that same second he responded nervously. Xiao Bai said that since everyone is safe, he recognizes them as good bandits. The men were touched by this title. And Xiao Bai has tears in his eyes that he is ready to stay with them and hopes that they can get along with each other. All the bandits were very happy about this great news and began to shout, glorifying their new leader. The long corridors were filled with happy cries and men glorified the white beast. The next day, Ariana asked if the guy wouldn't go further to look for his master. Xiao Bai said that he wanted to take care of the bandit's safety first and asked the girl to be careful on the way. Ariana said that she would be happy to help him when she finished family matters and suggested that he come and visit because he would be welcome. Xiao Bai asked why her grandfather should be happy about his arrival, since they don't even know each other. After that, the guy waved goodbye to the girl and wished her a safe journey. Ariana was a little annoyed. Therefore, she shouted that the guy could stay with his bandits forever and quickly rode off on a horse. Xiao Bai asked why Ariana didn't say goodbye to him, and the tiger couldn't believe that the guy really didn't understand. They were distracted from this conversation by the shout of one of the bandits. He notified everyone that they were under attack. The guy stood on the tower and shouted at the bandits were 3 kilometers northwest of their property. The guy couldn't finish speaking because the bandits shot him in the chest and he fell. The alarm was immediately raised in the settlement, and the deputy chief said that they were being attacked by fire bandits. Xiao Bai didn't understand how they hit the guy from such a distance, and the man explained that they had muskets. The wounded guy was removed from the tower and tried to stop the bleeding. The fire bandits weren't that strong, but they had a lot of muskets. The deputy chief was sure that they had learned about the death of their chief, who could fight them, and now came to attack them. The boss of the fire bandit said that the wind disturbed the trajectory of the bullet, and the guy did not die and is now in pain. The man ordered his subordinates to move faster to save the guy from suffering. The deputy chief ordered to close the entrance with large boulders so as not to let the fire bandits through. One of the bandits ran to the deputy and said that they could not block the entrance because the chief refused to enter. Xiao Bai stood in the clearing in front of the huge skull and looked out for the fire bandits who were approaching them. The deputy told Xiao Bai that he was crazy and would simply be shot, and the other bandit decided that the chief did not know about the power of muskets. However, Xiao Bai had no intention of listening to them and remained where he was when he heard laughter nearby. The boss of the fire bandits laughed and asked why the guy wasn't hiding. Had he forgotten how to walk out of fear? The man asked if the Skull Gang members didn't wear masks and decided that the guy was new to their group. Xiao Bai listened to the man and said that he was indeed the new leader of the Skull Gang. The man laughed and said that the previous one had quit last night, and some weakling was immediately chosen as the new one. Xiao Bai told the man to swear that the fire bandits would not come again, otherwise he would kill everyone. The boss of the fire gang did not immediately understand that the guy was seriously saying such things in his position and was confused. And then he began to laugh loudly and fell to his knees to calm down his amusement a little. The fire gang boss then stood up, raised his hand and snapped his fingers, giving his bandits permission. Therefore, the next moment, a huge number of muskets appeared behind the boss, aimed at the guy. The deputy chief was very nervous and realized that it was all over and the chief would definitely die from their muskets. The fire gang boss walked up to Xiao Bai and pressed the muzzle of his musket to the serious guy's forehead. The man said that he would finish off all the people from the Skull Gang, and continued to press the muzzle of the musket to the other's forehead. And then he added that the guy could kneel down and beg, and then he might be released. Yi Xiao Bai frowned and told the fire group boss that they wouldn't succeed because he promised to protect them. The guy said that he accepted the agreement with the Skull Gang and his deputy cried while watching this. The deputy raised his weapon and called on all his brothers to fight alongside the chief against the enemies. The fire gang boss said he accepted Xiao Bai's answer and fired a musket at his head. But he missed, because the guy seemed to be in a different place in a second, and the bullet flew nearby. The Skull Gang bandits were shocked and they saw how easily their new boss dodged a bullet. Now the fire gang boss felt the tension rising and asked who Xiao Bai was. Yi Xiao Bai put his hand on his heart and said with a smile that he is the new head of this gang, just as he said before. The fire gang boss looked at the strange guy in front of him in confusion, who was about to protect his people. The man decided that the newcomer was just lucky the first time, so he grabbed the musket and started shooting. However, Xiao Bai remained motionless in place, not afraid of being shot, and the musket bent. Xiao Bai said the man used force to intimidate and kill and should pay for it. The man looked at his weapon and did not understand how this was possible. He asked if the guy really had an iron head. The fire gang boss turned to run away and shouted that he would be back to deal with them. Xiao Bai called meow meow, and the white tiger instantly jumped out of its hiding place and went after the man. The white tiger hovered in the air right above the fire gang boss and was very happy that he could finally deal with someone. He asked the man where he was going and, using his enormous strength, pressed the man into the ground. The fire gang boss was covered in blood and shouted for his brothers to shoot and not worry about him. The skull bandits panicked and they realized that a huge number of bullets were about to rain down on their boss, as well as on them. The fire bandits fired simultaneously from their hiding spots, and the shots made a lot of noise. The white tiger looked up and saw a huge pile of shells flying at him and was a little confused. But Xiao Bai appeared in front of him and blocked Meow Meow from the bullets. The guy reached for his sword, and he asked the white tiger to remember one important thing: the bullets were already very close to the guy. Then he took out his sword and with one blow repelled all the bullets, and he said that anyone who wants to harm him will get what they deserve. The bullets changed their direction and got lost in Xiao Bai's spiritual power. Everything happened too quickly. Xiao Bai was still standing in front of Meow Meow, and his blow along with the bullets flew further into the distance. And then the guy realized that he had gone a little overboard and felt very embarrassed about how it all turned out. He missed a little, and now a small mountain nearby was left without its top. The white tiger continued to hold the fire bandit boss's head, but allowed him to see how much strength Xiao Bai had. The man did not believe his eyes and did not understand how this was possible, and the tiger was glad that someone shared his feelings. The bandits of the Skull Gang also watched with open mouths the abilities of their new boss. The tiger let the man go and he ran to call everyone to come out and greet God, and Xiao Bai said that the man had gone crazy. Tiger said that it was Xiao Bai's strength that was to blame when they heard screams behind them. The men were delighted and said that they needed to destroy the remaining opponents, and with the new boss they could not be afraid of anyone. They wanted to seize all the resources and destroy all competitors, but Xiao Bai angrily refused them. The men did not expect such a reaction from him and immediately calmed down and looked at the new boss in surprise. The guy said that he stayed only for protection, and they should be kind and not bloodthirsty bandits. The deputy chief listened to Xiao Bai's speech and asked if they could rob, and the guy angrily said that they couldn't. The deputy chief awkwardly asked what kind of bandits would they be if they didn't rob and also didn't have food. Xiao Bai thought about it while the men said that they would have to starve because the harvest would not be enough. The guy thought for a while, and then said that they could rob other bandits, since they rob from others. The men listened to the new boss's proposal, but were not sure that it would be the right thing to do. Xiao Bai asked to be taken to other bandits and said that it would be okay if they stole the loot. Night fell and the Skull Gang led their boss to where the Wolf Gang lived. Their flag fluttered on one of the hills. On the mountains near the large cliffs there were many men with spears who were guarding their territory. Xiao Bai greeted the men from the Wolf Gang and thus attracted attention. He stood in front of the other men and asked the alien gang to give them all their provisions. The men recognized the Gang of Skulls and were surprised why they came so politely, and even without a boss. The deputy introduced their new boss and said that Xiao Bai would let them survive if they gave up the provisions. The Wolf Gang laughed and began to discuss how small their boss was and that they were very scared. Xiao Bai listened to how they were told that they were not worthy of being pots and how they were given a chance to leave. And since the guy got very angry, the entire Wolf Gang was wiped off the face of the earth in a few moments. The next target of the herd is a gang of wild boars. They did not receive them very warmly and wanted to settle old scores. Xiao Bai listened to others' insults and could not restrain himself from being attacked by bandits. Therefore, the gang of boars suffered the same unattractive fate as the gang of wolves. Meanwhile, Ariana had already reached home and was in the main building of the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce. The servants came to grandfather and announced that Miss Ariana had finally returned home. Ariana was dressed in a luxurious dress and happily walked into the room of her beloved grandfather. The grandfather hugged the girl and said that he was very glad that everything was fine with his granddaughter. Ariana cried and told her grandfather that Uncle Brewster had betrayed him and conspired with the bandits. Grandfather said that greed was to blame for everything and promised that he would destroy all the guilty bandits. The man patted the girl on the head, and Ariana asked how exactly he wanted to destroy them. It turned out that the Korna's empire would destroy the bandits with its army under the command of Prince Reese. The prince took 3 great magicians with him on the journey so that he would definitely destroy everyone, and Ariana was worried. The rabbit was at the edge of the path, which was the road near the mountains of demonic beasts. The rabbit was calmly eating tasty grass when he heard a strange and unusual noise behind him. When he turned around, he saw a huge army of people approaching him. They were on horses, dressed in armor, holding the flags of their kingdom in their hands and confidently moving forward. The old wizard was outraged that they were taken to such a distance for the sake of destroying ordinary bandits. Prince Reyes said that Mitchell paid them a lot of money and also hired magicians for backup. In this vast mystical world there is one more group that cannot be mentioned, and these are the magicians. Unlike swordsmen, who rely on their physical strength, magicians work with their minds. A simple song can be enough to summon destructive power. The highest rank among magicians is considered to be the god Dharma, followed by the holiest magician, great, master and ordinary magician. In the center there is an ordinary magician, senior, intermediate, beginner, and after the wizard and the lowest student title. For a small country, getting a great magician is equivalent to being under the tutelage of a god, and against 3 magicians, even the god of the sword cannot win. The army stumbled upon the destroyed ruins of a place that used to be a hideout for bandits. Prince Reese asked who dealt with them and whether they had invited anyone else besides them. Prince Reese called his greyhound 4, and they instantly appeared in front of him. The man asked them to explore the area to see if there were still bandits left, to know if they were traveling in vain. The gods 4 were dressed all in black and wore masks on their faces. They immediately followed the order. The village, which was not far from the scene of the events, looked empty, only many bags lay in the center. The old man prayed that it would rain, because otherwise their village would die without water and food. The man saw that there were huge bags of food lying right in front of his house. He was very happy that now they could afford to eat a little. People who finally wanted to eat began to approach the bags in the center of the village. The Skull Gang men watched the villagers from the bushes and heard them enjoying their food. The men were glad that they had made people happy on the orders of their boss, and they admired his nobility. The deputy chief stood up from his hiding place and said that it was time for them to go to the next village. And when they were about to leave, they heard a man's cry and turned back. The men were shocked and they saw what caused the loud scream. An elderly man was hit in the face and his teeth were knocked out. You could fall to the ground from such a strong blow. One of the members of the Greyhound Quartet was pressing the old man to the ground and holding a bag of food in his hands. The man in black asked the old man what the bandit's food was doing in his hands. One of the villagers told the people in black that he was wrong and that food was a gift from God. The man in black, who was pressing the grandfather to the ground, threw a stone at the resident. The man started bleeding from his head and fell to the ground, and his daughter was very worried about her father. The man in black said that it was the last time to ask who brought the food here. The old man repeated that they do not know what is happening. They are just poor local residents. The man in black silently towered over the old man, and then ordered the food to be returned immediately. The Skull Gang bandits watched what was happening and tried to figure out what to do if the new bandits were taking people away. The deputy chief sent Lao Jiao to the camp to report to the boss, and he himself was going to stop the men in black. The Skull Gang rode on carts and sang about their motto of not harming good people. The White Tiger threw alcohol to those men who continued the song correctly as a reward. Xiaobai rode on a carriage and enjoyed his title as the greatest chief and the most powerful boss. Suddenly a man ran out nearby, shouting that something terrible had happened. The guy saw Lao Jiao and asked why he returned alone after going to the village. The man said that a group of bandits stole food from the locals and also killed some of them in cold blood. The bottle of alcohol that the guy was holding in his hand broke because he squeezed it too hard. Xiaobai was very angry and called his gang brothers to deal with these bandits. The Greyhound 4 tied up the men, children and women. Do not pay attention to the children's cries. They returned to the prince's tent and reported that they had discovered bandits' food and livestock in the village. Prince Reese came out of his tent with a girl in his arms, who asked if they were going to destroy the bandits hundreds of miles away. The villagers asked the principal to believe that they had not stolen anything, and the bags of food appeared on their own in the morning. The deputy chief told his friend that everything was lost because a whole army was standing in front of them. He pointed to the flag and said that it bore the royal emblem of the Cornean Empire. The deputy chief said that it was time for them to leave because the army would begin to push back the bandits. The deputy chief was not looking ahead when he ran away, so he collided with the unknown man. This man turned out to be a magician who could smell the stench of dirty bandits even a kilometer away. The prince and his girlfriend saw an explosion in the trees not far from where they were, and the man realized that the master had found someone in the bushes and sent officers there. The knights ran to the scene and saw two unconscious men, whom the magician had already dealt with. The old man said that the stupid people did not even suspect that bandits had been watching them all this time. The prince was glad that they had Poppy with them and asked to check if there were any other suspicious persons nearby. The deputy chief stood up, despite all the wounds on his body, and said that there were only two of them here. One of the 4 greyhounds hit the man on the legs with a sword and ordered him to bow to the prince. But the deputy chief did not fall to his knees, despite the wounds. While the blood flowed down his pants, he continued to stand. The man was very angry and asked the man why he should bow down to such people. And then he furiously talked about how they asked the imperial family many times to save them, but no one listened. And now they, like bandits, want to be worshipped. Mac laughed at the bandit, and one of the members of the Greyhound Quartet raised his sword to strike and shouted for the bandit to accept his death. But Prince Reese ordered him to stop immediately. He told the bandit that he was giving him a chance to survive and fight him. The man in black gave the bandit his sword, and the prince said that if the bandit wins, he will take the villagers and leave. The magicians were unhappy that the prince started his game again and discussed that they did not want to see this scene again. The bandit grabbed the sword tighter and was about to rush into the attack, but the magicians preferred to simply close their eyes so as not to see it. The deputy chief ran despite his wounded leg to try to save the villagers, and the magicians kept discussing what record the principal had set last time in cutting a human body into pieces. And this time Prince Reese intended to chop this man into no less than 4,000 pieces. The guy who was with the deputy chief and was taken by surprise by the magician began to come to his senses. When he opened his eyes and sat down on the ground, he could not understand what was happening around him and what had happened to them. He heard heavy breathing and saw a seriously wounded deputy chief who could barely stand on his feet. The prince stood with his sword thrown over his shoulders and said that he didn't even have to strain himself in this fight. The bandit saw that this man dared to harm the deputy chief and grabbed a stone and rushed to attack. The deputy chief began to shout that the man should not dare to approach the prince, but he did not listen to him. Prince Reese saw another beautiful victim who would be suitable for his entertainment and smiled. After this, the man made several movements with the ball and cut the huge stone into small pieces. And along with this stone, it completely cut the body of the person who was carrying it into even smaller pieces. The deputy chief was screaming, there were tears in his eyes, and he couldn't believe it had happened. The villagers also watched in horror what the prince had done and turned a blind eye to the children. One of the magicians thought that blood and steel was a magnificent sight, and the rest felt disgust. Suddenly, one of the magicians noticed that there was some object from above and it had a strange flight path. The prince stepped on a piece of the body of the previous bandit and said that now it was the deputy chief's turn. He would be very angry and understand that this is the end of him, so he mentally asked the boss not to be angry. Prince Reese moved towards the bandit and prepared to cut him into hundreds of small pieces. But they did not have time to get closer to each other, because that strange flying object landed between them. Prince Reese looked ahead in shock, and could not understand what happened right in front of him. From the fall of some object, a lot of smoke rose around, and sparks were flying everywhere, and the man had to cover his nose. It turned out that such a strong fall created a hole in the ground, and when the smoke cleared, one could see someone else's hand. One of the magicians said that the monster had strange claws, and the second corrected him and said that these were human hands. The deputy chief was crying and could not believe that the chief appeared in front of him at the last second. Xiao Bai actually came out of the pit. You did it a little clumsily, but you still got out. Due to the fact that the guy had been singing alcohol before, he was a little drunk, but he was serious. The prince laughed at this picture and said that not only was their leader a boy, he was also drunk. Prince Reese asked if the little leader would like to fight him. If he is not afraid, then let him take out his sword. The man was confident that another easy victory awaited him and enjoyed his superiority, but his laughter was interrupted by a blow to the face, which caused the principal's teeth to fly out, and he himself flew back while Xiao Bai continued to fight him with his bare hands. The knights became worried because the prince was beaten by a drunkard and decided that the man had succumbed to the bandit. The sheriff's deputy began screaming and asking the chief to take revenge for what the man did to Shido. Xiao Bai concentrated his spiritual power into his fists, and happily continued to take revenge for everyone who was hurt by this man. And Prince Reese did not have time to react or attack in response, and the sword fell out of his hand. And after a particularly strong blow from the sword god, he flew away and fell to the ground amid the screams of his subjects. The knights screamed and were about to kill the drunkard who attacked their highness. But the man did not let them do this and said that Xiao Bai was the first who dared to hit him. There was a huge bump on the principal's head. He was covered in bruises and had no teeth, but he shouted that it didn't hurt him at all and he gave in. The magicians discussed the prince's iron will and the fact that he was just playing with the boy, so he allowed himself to be hit. The prince again had a sword in his hands, and he said that he would do this bandit the honor of dying from his secret technique. He channeled his spiritual power into the blade and prepared to attack with the 1,000 obsidian swings technique. All these threads headed toward Xiao Bai, and his deputy shouted for the guy to dodge immediately. But Xiao Bai took out his dark sword and easily cut all the prince's threads. Prince Reese felt confused when he realized that the drunkard had cut through his blow. He didn't understand how a person could cut through the royal family's strongest technique so easily. When I suddenly felt the technique of 10,000 cuts on myself and realized that this was not an ordinary bandit. The man's body began to crumble into small squares, and in the last moments of his life he thought about the guy. Xiao Bai was covering his deputy so that he would not accidentally fall under his next attack. The guy turned to the army and hit them with his strong spiritual blow, destroying everyone. The deputy chief looked at the guy's actions and realized that his boss had incinerated the entire camp. He thought uneasily that the boss was usually not so cruel, and then saw that he was drunk. The magicians defended themselves with barriers and tried to figure out how they would explain that the prince was left with only ashes. One of the magicians told the second that since there was nothing left of the prince and the army was destroyed, they could not just leave. And the magicians prepared to use the forbidden technique to defeat Xiao Bai. Seals began to form around the guy, and various letters flew around him, encasing him in a cage. When Xiao Bai looked down, she saw a huge seal, and his deputy shouted that this was a forbidden spell. The sword god asked the guy to move away and said that he wanted to see what these old men were capable of. The deputy chief did not want to leave him in such a dangerous situation, but he was given no choice and rudely pushed him away. Several seals rose high into the sky, and a beam of enormous power passed through them in the center. The sword god was trapped in the forbidden technique of the three magicians and screamed in pain. The deputy chief understood that he could not help in any way and all he could do was scream and call the chief. After some time, the guy finally took out his dark sword, grabbed its hilt tightly and raised it to strike. And then he easily cut all the seals of the forbidden techniques of the three strongest magicians around him. The magicians were amazed at the enormous power the man in front of them possessed. All of their seals were broken and another huge golden beam appeared in the sky, surrounded by a small pink light. This color could be seen by people in the city, and everyone was wondering what was going on and where it came from. People whispered and asked what level of skill was needed to reach such heights and create such a thing. The master sipped his tea and was surprised that Xiao Bai had made such a fuss and realized that the city would soon be restless. It was a huge tower that went high into the sky all the way to the clouds. And at the very top of this tower was the High Council of Blagdalu. The only things you could see from the windows on this floor were birds. The council had met for the first time in over 100 years and was now trying to figure out why they were here. The knight said 4 council members were unable to attend and it was Mr. Bashing who initiated it. The council members were surprised and began to remember that the man had no intention of getting off the mountain until he reached the 10th sword rank. Master Xiao Bai sent a letter to the senior council, telling him that his disciple had reached the sword god level yesterday. The council members realized that this was the same guy whom the master had picked up 16 years ago. The elf said that this time was too little and suggested that the master had gone crazy to give such a title to the boy. 2 more council members supported the elf and said that the master was always strange and spoke all sorts of nonsense. They were discussing what they would do if the old master got angry and came here, when the whole room suddenly shook. The men could not understand what was happening, and the head of the Chamber of Commerce, Mitchell, suggested that an earthquake had begun. But a huge amount of light began to come in through the upstairs window, and then the entire building was surrounded by the strongest rays of spiritual power that belonged to the sword god. Someone thought it was a spell, but another man refuted this theory and said that even hundreds of magicians could not do this. Now that each member of the council felt such great power close to them, they thought that the news might be true. The elf raised his hand and said that he was putting it to the vote to grant Xiaobai the title of Dark God of the Black Sword. The hands of all 4 remaining council members who were present at the meeting immediately went up, after which, with the help of little dragons, they decided to send this to the guilds of the chambers of commerce of all countries. The news is that Master Bashenga's disciple, 16 years old, receives the title of Dark Black Sword. One of the council members was about to put a seal, and the knight reminded that this was not a portrait of the Black Sword God. Xiaobai felt very exhausted and yawned because he was very sleepy. He rubbed his eyes and wondered why all his clothes were torn. Then he noticed in front of him the enormous damage he had caused with his attack yesterday. The guy himself didn't remember when he did something like that, so he was very surprised. He decided to quickly leave the crime scene, and he himself wondered how he got here in the first place and what he was doing here. As he ran away, he noticed that someone's legs were sticking out of the ground nearby and he became interested. Xiaobai grabbed the man by the ankles and pulled him out of the hole. This man turned out to be his deputy. The guy let him go and asked what he was doing here. If he had gone to distribute food to the villagers. The man caught his breath. And then he looked at his boss in surprise and could not believe that he did not remember how he cut the heavens through the earth with his blow. The deputy told him that Xiaobai was drunk, but the guy did not remember anything special about yesterday. At this moment, the white tiger finally came running from the army of bandits. They were ready to fight. The chief was very surprised that they were going to fight with someone. Since he did not remember anything, the deputy began to awkwardly explain what happened. Xiaobai pointed at himself in surprise and could not believe that he had incinerated an entire army without even remembering it. The deputy calmed down and said that all these people deserved to die, and the chief was simply saving him and the peasants. Xiaobai held his head and now understood why the master had kept him away from the bar all this time. The guy said that they needed to train more and was going to go in search of a master. Well, his deputy panicked. None of the bandits wanted Xiaobai to leave them, and they begged him to stay on their knees. Miao Miao smiled contentedly and shouted to the bandits that he would be happy to help them and asked them not to worry. They soon found themselves next to an army of ants who promised to protect the gang at all costs. And in return they asked to put in a good word with the god of dragons. The white tiger said that he would definitely give it to him. After that, the white tiger moved closer to the main ant and asked him not to call him by name when Xiaobai was around. Afterwards the tiger shed a tear because the sacred beast had turned into a pet. The bandits could not believe that such strong creatures served the white tiger, and now they would also protect them. The deputy chief continued to cry in Xiaobai's arms and thank him for everything he had done for them. Afterwards, the deputy turned to his brothers and told them to prepare a party in honor of their friends. When night fell, they gathered in their headquarters and prepared to properly send off their boss. Everyone had full glasses of beer, and they also ate meat. Everyone tried to have fun and not think about sad things. 2 guys brought a huge bowl of food and told everyone to raid the chef's food. Xiaobai watched people quickly eat and praise his food and enjoyed it. The party was a success, and when dawn came, Xiaobai and the tiger were about to leave, but no one came out to say goodbye to them. The white tiger wanted to show them what it was like not to say goodbye to dear people, but Xiaobai stopped him. He said it was just hard for people to say goodbye, so they didn't come out so as not to upset them with tears. The white tiger turned to the guy and also shed a few tears in honor of such a strong male friendship. Xiaobai said that in addition to this, by not showing their weakness, they maintain their pride. The guy and the tiger left because men should not say goodbye to tears. Meanwhile, in the rooms, the men slept poorly due to the fact that they had eaten too much at yesterday's party. Soon they found themselves at the gate that led to the holy city of Elijah, where there was a large queue. The guard asked if the guy had an identification card and said that there was a fee for transporting animals. Xiaobai had never gone to the city before and did not know what the ID card and silver coin were that he needed to pay with. The knight handed the guy over to another employee and asked him to introduce the new guy to the city council. The knight walked a little ahead and asked why the city was bothering with such poor people if it was easier to drive them away. Xiaobai looked around in admiration and carefully examined all the beautiful places that caught his eye. It was his first time in a real city and he saw huge, majestic buildings. They approached a building called the Swordsmen's Association, and it was huge, and next to it was a stone statue of a knight. Xiao Bai looked at everything around with delight, and the patrolman ordered to stand still and not go anywhere. The white tiger was now sitting on his shoulder in the form of a small kitten and was indignant at this behavior, but the guy asked him to be calmer. Meow Meow sighed heavily and said that he should have taken money with him. Screams were heard not far from them. Two men behaved aggressively with a girl and a child. They trampled the food that the girl was carrying in her basket. When the girl and child began to run away, the man in the hat said that they should not attract unnecessary attention to themselves. He reminded his partner that he just needed to be reminded how many people are in the Swordsmen's Association, and then the Dark Lord will be pleased. The man turned forward to walk further and accidentally bumped into Xiao Bai. His partner immediately became very angry and began shouting and demanding that the guy apologize. Xiao Bai turned to him enthusiastically and asked what the man would do if he did not apologize. The guy came closer and closer to the nervous man and asked him to hit him quickly, and the bandit decided that the guy was crazy. The men hurried to hide, and Xiao Bai regretted that they had not fought. The white tiger said to be less persistent next time. The guy took out a bag of money and said that, at least, they received some silver pieces. The patrolman returned and started screaming, asked the guy not to leave the place, and now he would go clean the toilets. Xiao Bai took out one coin from the bag and asked if it was a piece of silver. The patrolman began to mock the guy. But I saw that a bunch of gold coins were spilling out of the bag and couldn't believe that the guy had that kind of money. Xiao Bai noticed that the color of the coins was not silver at all and was worried that the money would not fit. But the patrolman began to smile and explain that one gold coin is worth 100 pieces of silver. The man thought that Xiao Bai was just pretending to be poor, and the guy was holding a bunch of coins in his hands and supported this theory. Xiao Bai gave the patrolman one spool and said that he was paying for cleaning the toilet. The patrolman offered to escort him to the registration place, but Xiao Bai was suspicious of the men. These were the two who behaved rudely with the girl, and were now standing suspiciously near one of the buildings. The patrolman frowned and decided that these were escaped bandits, and the guy confirmed that they needed to be searched. The man looked out from around the corner and told his partner that he didn't have to worry and they wouldn't miss anyone. The patrolman approached them and asked the young people to show their badges. The men became worried, but they quickly gathered their thoughts and the man in the hat began rummaging in his pockets to provide their badges. However, he noticed that he could not find anything in his pockets and realized that they were in big trouble. The man in the hat shouted for both badges to disappear and they had no money either. The patrolman did not believe them and said that they looked like ordinary bandits, and not peaceful citizens. They detained the man even more and began to convince him that they were absolutely ordinary people, but the patrolman could not convince. The bandits looked at each other and understood that under no circumstances should they go for a search. So they made a decision and started running, and the patrolman began to chase them and try to catch them. The men had to stop when a beam of light flashed over their heads with enormous force and speed. In the area where this beam of light landed, a small but quite strong explosion occurred. The patrolman was delighted when he saw this and realized that it was Lord Harris himself who had arrived. Lord Harris stood on the roof of one of the towers, and next to him were his knights. The locals were very happy when they saw the head of the Swordsmen's Association, Yulan Dalu. Lord Harris and his knights neutralized the bandits, and the patrolman knelt in front of him, greeting the Lord. Lord Harris asked if they had found the sword god, and the patrolman reported that no leads were found. The man nodded and thought that the sword god would definitely decide to pass through this city first. They needed to intercept him first. Lord Harris ordered the search to continue and went to the Swordsmen's Association building. The patrol turned to Xiao Bai, only to find that he was no longer there, and asked where he had gone. Xiao Bai held two badges in his hands and believed that they needed to find out their level from someone. The white tiger really wanted to take his usual form, but the guy said that he would scare all the residents. Suddenly, Xiao Bai felt the presence of his master not far away and realized that he had found him. The guy was so happy that he accidentally threw Meow Meow off his shoulder when he started calling for the master. Lord Harris was led into a private room. The man appeared in the doorway, accompanied by other knights. Master Bashing was already sitting inside the room. He drank tea and was glad that someone had come. The men took out their swords and blocked Lord Harris. "And what kind of old man is this?" But Harris stopped them and asked them to leave him alone. his defenders were not sure whether to do so. Lord Harris said that this man was the strongest swordsman at the moment and asked them not to even think about engaging in battle. The man couldn't believe that the old man in front of him was actually the strongest sword saint. Bashing said that now he can no longer be called the strongest, but Harris said they don't recognize the sword god until they see it. Master Bashing said that he knows that Harris wants Xiaobai to help him and advises him not to involve him in the affairs of the association. Lord Karis froze in place and looked at Master Bashenga in surprise, but the old man did not understand what had happened. Lord Harris grabbed his head and shouted that he was sure that the guy's name was Yi Xiaohei, not Xiaobai. Harpus stood up and nervously called for the servants to come over, but the old master ordered the man to sit down. Bashing said seriously that he had heard enough and now they needed to talk about more important matters. Bashing told Guan Yu that this directly affected Yi Xiaobai's life. The man was very excited. Master Bashing walked through the snowy mountains, he drank alcohol and sang various songs. But he had to stop when he heard something very similar to a child's cry. At first the man thought it was his imagination, but the cry sounded again and he realized that the child was nearby. He came closer to see the child. He wondered how the baby could end up in such a place. A small bundle lay on a stone, and fire dragons flew above it, warming the baby with their warmth. Master Bashing looked at the fiery figures and was very surprised. He had never seen children do something like this before. The man remembered that he was quite drunk and shook his head in an attempt to drive away the illusion. But this did not help correct the situation, and it became even worse than it was, and the man could not believe his eyes. Instead of fiery dragons above the baby, there were now silhouettes of people who protected the child. Master Bashing was very surprised and speechless from such events, so he froze for a while. The man fell to the ground and lost consciousness. His bottle of alcohol flew away from him. Through the darkness, Bashing heard someone addressing him as a sword saint and saw a woman's legs. The girl came closer to him. She was very beautiful and felt like something magical. She asked to take custody of the child, and one day she would definitely return to the boy. The man was still unconscious, but he heard perfectly well how the girl asked him not to let her down. Old man Bashing drank tea and said that since then he had not taken a drop of alcohol into his mouth. Lord Harris asked if the old man was sure that he had not imagined it and that everything had actually happened. The old man said that he was not sure about this, but even after all these years he still remembered her voice and waited for her to return. Xiaobai spent 10 years cultivating in the mountains, and now the student has surpassed the teacher and must move on. Bashing said that Xiaobai will not be defeated at this stage and ordered not to touch him until he finds that woman. Lord Harris smiled awkwardly and began to lie that he had not even intended to, when the master abruptly threw the cup onto the table. He got up and started running to the window. Harris asked what happened, and the old man replied that he had already stayed too long. Master Bashing said goodbye and jumped out the window. Lord Harris watched in shock as the man left the room. The next second, a terrible roar was heard behind Harris. Xiaobai broke through the floor and entered the room. The guy felt that the master was here and began shouting for him to come out immediately. Xiaobai promised to treat the master to mapo tofu and looked for him in all corners of the small room, not paying attention to the lord. The man watched the guy and couldn't believe that he could see the sword god so soon. Xiaobai gave Miao Miao a cup and ordered him to track the master by smell because they had to find him. The man thought that Xiaobai was still a child, but decided not to waste time and quickly adapted to the situation. Lord Harris behaved kindly, and he himself thought about how he could freely move around the world with its help. Xiaobai looked at the man in surprise, and only now noticed that there was someone else in the room with him. The guy realized that the master had escaped through the window and was about to follow him, but the man grabbed him by the clothes. He asked Xiaobai to stop and the guy was surprised that this man knew his name. The man said that he had to give the guy a message from the master and offered to discuss everything over a cup of tea. Harris sat at the table and said that the master believed that it was time for him to develop on his own. Xiaobai began to cry because the master had really abandoned him, and Harris said that they would see each other again. Then the man awkwardly asked why the guy ignored him when he said hello to him. Xiaobai listened to the question and thought about the answer for a second, and then explained his reason. The guy said that the master had previously asked him to stay away from Harris, and the man asked how he knew it was him. Xiaobai said the man fit the description, a blond man with a creepy look who never shaved his mustache. Then the guy remembered that he never received a badge and asked if the man could help him. Lord Harris agreed to help with the registration and took out a small white crystal. He put it on the table. And he asked Xiao Bai to pour some internal energy into him, and the guy reached for the crystal. Xiao Bai did everything as Lord Harris asked, but the crystal began to glow suspiciously brightly. And then it exploded, breaking a window and a piece of the wall. The explosion was very loud, and all the birds hurried to fly away. Meow meow, Xiao Bai and Harris sat in silence and tried to recover from the recent explosion. Xiao Bai got angry and told the man that the master was right and that he could not be trusted or relied on for help. The man tried to justify himself and said that the crystal was too weak and could not withstand his energy. Then Harris brought another, the strongest crystal, and said that it was called Yurong. The crystal glowed depending on the person's level, and when the sword god touched it, it turned bright red. Xiao Bai asked if he could keep his level a secret, and the man advised to reduce the flow of energy. The crystal began to glow yellow, which meant that the person wielded the sword at the 7th level. Xiao Bai said that he needed to go even lower and weakened his flow of energy to the green color of the crystal, which meant the 4th level. But even so, it was too much, and the guy continued to reduce the flow of his internal energy. He was pleased when the crystal turned white and Harris couldn't believe that the guy wanted to be a level 1 swordsman. Xiao Bai was happy and pointed to his white badge, but the man didn't understand how he could want to pretend to be a newcomer. After that, Xiao Bai stood up from his seat, bowed and said goodbye to the man. The guy was almost out through the window when the man stopped him again. Xiao Bai asked what else the man wanted from him. And Harris invited Xiao Bai to find out the nature of his power, since the man really wanted to keep him close to him. The guy wanted to test the sword, but the man said that if he uses it all the time, the characteristics will be similar. Xiao Bai agreed to test the nature of his power and extended his hand to the small ball that Harris had brought. The man said that now they will see how strong he is, and the magic ball began its work. All the matter of their world was divided into 7 different categories, that is, elements. These are fire, earth and ice. There were also elements such as air, lightning, light, and also darkness. Every person was a carrier of an element. Elements can enter into different reactions with each other, even to the point of mutual destruction. Many compare swordsmen by strength, assessing not their skills, but their belonging to one category or another. Harris believed that this approach was not correct because, despite his rare element, he worked hard to achieve success. The man told Xiao Bai that his strength would not change based on the test result. The guy began to worry. He asked if the ball was really broken since it did not change its color, and Harris became very nervous. The man took the ball and said that it could not break because it was an important relic. Harris tested the ball on himself and it changed color, and Xiao Bai asked why he didn't work on it. The man became worried and asked if it could be that the guy did not master any of the elements. Xiao Bai was very surprised and asked if it was even possible for someone not to have an element. Harris grabbed the guy by the hand and said that he must enroll in his academy so that they could evaluate his abilities. Xiao Bai did not understand where he needed to go, and the man spoke about his Eldian Swordsman Academy. Xiao Bai decided that they shouldn't go to the magicians since the master was trying to hide from them and asked Meow Meow if they should go to the swordsman. The white tiger liked this idea. There was a sign on the road that showed which direction the academies were located. Master Bashing stood at a crossroads and was sure that his student would never figure out where he had gone. After all, in fact, the man was heading to the Eldian Swordsman Academy, and he was pleased with his insidious plan. The old man ran along the road that led to the Swordsman Academy, and was sure that he would never be found. Xiao Bai took the kitten from the table and said that it was time for him to go. The man wanted to know if the guy would join them. The guy pointed at his badge in surprise and asked if he hadn't already done this. It turned out that he had simply registered, but Harris was offering to become an honorary elder of the Swordsman Alliance. At first the guy was happy, but then he realized that the man was offering this for a reason and wanted something from him. Lord Harris admitted that he would like to enlist Yi Xiao Bai's support in case of danger. The guy and the white tiger became gloomy because it was clear that this man wanted to use them. Harris immediately backed down and said that Xiao Bai had the right to refuse, but now the guy knew the truth. Xiao Bai smiled and said that he was waiting for something more difficult, so the man could count on him. Lord Harris burst into tears of happiness and thought that the old man and the dwarf-like king were now afraid of him. The man was very happy that he could find such a strong protector of the Swordsman Association. Xiao Bai again tried to leave, but the man asked if he would still go to the Eldian Swordsman Academy. The guy said he would come by later because he was going to the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce to meet someone. Lord Harris was shocked and asked, and this guy managed to meet people from Luo. Xiao Bai didn't know who the man was talking about, and Harris was glad that Mitchell would not take his loot. Harris said he wanted to give the guy one more piece of advice before he left, and he began to draw something on a piece of paper. Then the man showed a portrait of Ariana's grandfather and ordered Xiao Bai not to trust him under any circumstances. The guy noticed that the man looked suspicious, and Harris said that the old man was bilious and a vile miser. Xiao Bai finally came out of the building and told Miao Miao that he was very hungry and they were interested in trying the local food. And since there was only one way to find out the answer to this question, Xiao Bai and the White Tiger ran to look for a cafe. On every street they came across magicians and swordsmen, and the guy wondered why there were so many of them. The White Tiger said that a secret dimension had recently been discovered, so all the strong people gathered here, waiting for the discovery. The guy was thinking about his friend's words and was about to move on when someone called his name. When they turned around, they saw that the man Lord Harris had asked them to stay away from was calling them. Xiao Bai immediately remembered all the bad words the Lord had said about the man and didn't know what to do. The guy decided to say that he saw the desired store on the other side and left, but the man ran after him. Mitchell Rodriguez introduced himself and said that he was the head of the Chamber of Commerce and asked the guy not to run away. The guy stopped and remembered that Ariana's grandfather was the head of the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce. The man confirmed this guess. The White Tiger decided that the man was lying because the head of the first Chamber of Commerce in the market was a suspicious guest. The guy asked the man to prove his identity, but Rodriguez said he forgot his badge because he was in a rush. And then he said that he could prove this by the fact that he would enter any establishment and they would not take a penny from them. Xiao Bai was delighted and asked if this meant he could eat as much food as he wanted for free. Rodriguez confirmed his guess and Xiao Bai grabbed the man to take him to one of the cafes. On one of the streets there is a girl with a crab-shaped hat. The girl was carrying boiled lobster on a tray. This restaurant was the most expensive, and Xiao Bai greedily ate one lobster after another. Mitchell Rodriguez nervously said that this is one of the advantages of powerful people. Some will never be able to afford it. Xiao Bai continued to eat and asked if the food would definitely be free, because he did not have enough money to pay. Rodriguez snapped his fingers and called Xiao Er to their table to calm down Xiao Bai. The happy girl ran up to them and said that their dinner cost 112 pieces of silver. Mitchell Rodriguez asked if she didn't know who he was that she was telling him to pay the bill. The girl folded her arms and said that their restaurant was visited by thousands of people, and she couldn't remember everyone. The man pointed to his face and said he was the head of the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce. The girl turned away and told the boss that another Rodriguez had come and was not going to pay. The door opened and the chef of this establishment appeared in the guest room. He approached the table with loud steps. The boss turned out to be a huge man who was flexing his fists and talking about how the Rodriguezes got him. The man looked at the old man threateningly and said that for deception he would send him to the crayfish as food. The chief leaned over to Rodriguez and told the old man to pay immediately or he would regret it. Mitchell hesitantly asked to leave him. But the boss was not going to listen to him. He was furious and hit the old man's plate with his fist. Then he turned the table over and began accusing the man of pretending to be an aristocrat. Xiao Bai took the plates of food into his hands and continued to eat and watch the scandal. Miao Miao didn't understand how the guy continued to eat. The rest of the guests began to support the chef and reproached the stranger for eating for free at Mitchell's royal restaurant. The old man realized that the situation was starting to get out of control, and I decided that something needed to be done. Mitchell Rodriguez decided to try to scare everyone present with the help of his magic. The restaurant chef immediately became scared and began to retreat when he saw that the old man was about to use some kind of spell. The waiter and restaurant guests saw the man using magic and realized that he really was a magician. Rodriguez raised the ball of light and a seal formed around it. He asked how they dared to doubt him. The restaurant chef fell to his knees and began to beg the old man to spare him, but Rodriguez wanted him to say it with more confidence. Xiao Bai screamed and ordered Rodriguez to stop. The men looked at the guy expectantly. The restaurant's customers and the waitress also looked at Xiao Bai carefully and waited for further action. The guy wiped the table with a napkin and said that he hated hiccups. Xiaobai finally finished his dinner. So he got up from his chair and lifted the boss from his knees, then he said that it was all Rodriguez's fault. The guy told the chef not to be upset and said that he would pay for dinner himself. The man cried and thanked Xiaobai. The old man watched in confusion as the guy took out the money, but the restaurant chef refused to take it. One of the men told the waitress that the boss was still just as sensitive, and the girl was surprised that the old man turned out to be a magician. Mitchell Rodriguez was upset because he didn't get to try a single bite at the restaurant. When they came out, Xiaobai said that it's not clear how everyone knows him here, but the old man said that he was simply unlucky. He suggested going to the Chamber of Commerce so that the guy would have no doubts, and Xiaobai agreed. They went to the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce where a treasure auction was taking place. There was a huge line outside the building. Xiaobai was surprised by the huge number of people, and Rodriguez explained that today was the annual auction, but they could come right in. Near the entrance there were two girls in bunny costumes. They let people through and asked them to prepare payment in advance. Mitchell appeared next to the girls and coughed to get their attention. The man asked how sales were going and the girls said that they still had enough tickets, so everything was fine. After that, there was an awkward silence, and people in line looked at Rodriguez with displeasure. Mitchell asked the girl if she recognized him, but neither the girls nor the visitors knew who he was. For the old man this was a blow, and he thought that the dead are remembered forever, but the living are not remembered. The men decided that the old man was hitting on the girls and decided that they could teach him a lesson. Xiaobai smiled at the men and said that the old man just wanted to skip the line and didn't bother the girls. These words angered every person who stood in the long line, and now everyone wanted to teach the old man a lesson. The men began to condemn him for disorderly conduct, and Mitchell Rodriguez tried to explain to them who he was. But he couldn't even introduce himself, because a brick thrown by a disgruntled crowd flew into his face. The men attacked the old man with their fists and said that even if the head of the chamber came, they must have respect. When the men calmed down and the dust cleared, they saw that the old man was not in the same place. A group of guys started looking around trying to find the impudent old man, but they didn't succeed. Xiaobai took the man from the epicenter of the fight and took him away from the angry people. The man said he was fine and tried to get up, but blood started coming out of his eyes and mouth. Mitchell fell to the floor, and Xiaobai said the man definitely had internal injuries. The door next to them opened and Ariana saw Xiaobai sitting next to her grandfather on the street. She was very happy when she saw Xiaobai and asked what he was doing here. The guy turned to the girl and called her Eliana, and the grandfather was seriously wounded, so he also repeated this name. Ariana saw that her grandfather was bleeding and ran to him. She asked what happened to them. The man grabbed the girl by the shoulders and asked his granddaughter to tell him who he was and give his name. Ariana didn't understand what was going on, but said that he was Mitchell Rodriguez, the head of the Mitchell Chamber of Commerce. She asked if everything was okay, but grandfather was already dancing with happiness right in the middle of the street. The man laughed so hard that tears began to flow, but he still didn't stop. Xiaobai heard the words of his friend and could now be sure that the man was indeed the leader. The guy apologized for doubting, and Rodriguez rushed into the arms of his granddaughter and complained that no one would recognize him. Xiaobai and Ariana were walking around the city, and the girl invited the guy to come in for something to eat, but he refused. Ariana noticed a kitten on the guy's head and asked if it was the white tiger of the underworld. Xiaobai winked at her and said that she was right. The girl looked at Meow Meow and said that the tiger is very rare, and Meow Meow felt uncomfortable from these words. The guy did not participate in their conversation, and then grabbed Ariana by the hand and dragged her into the alley. They quickly ran down the alley, and the girl asked the guy what happened and why they were running away. Xiaobai remembered the people's views and told the girl about them, and then asked if they could know him. Tiger said that the Swordsmen's Association had received posters with his face on it, so he was being watched. The guy was very upset. Ariana said that she has one way that will help the guy go unnoticed. Meow Meow and Xiaobai turned to the girl with interest and were ready to take advantage of her idea. Ariana was pleased with her work and shouted that no one in life would guess who he was. Xiaobai was dressed in women's clothes and wore a wig, and the girl said that no one would think that the god of the sword wears a woman's dress. The guy asked if they would get into trouble, but Ariana was already pushing him towards the exit and telling him that everything would be fine. Many people were near the arch with a beautiful statue of horses on top. The sacred city of Ilias began with this arch. Armed guards lined the walls of the arched passage, and this gave the passage even greater majesty. The girls watched the handsome man with loving eyes, and they discussed how good he was. Today the handsome prince of the Temple of Light arrived in the holy city of Ilias. He rode a white horse and waved to the citizens. The prince's name was Shiolin, and every girl knew that the guy was single, therefore, his appearance caused a lot of emotions. The white tiger positioned itself between Ariana's breasts, and enjoyed my trip to a new place. And the girl asked displeasedly how long he would sit there, and Xiaobai watched as someone else's chest shook. And then Xiaobai sadly asked why his chest didn't shake like that, and Ariana screamed that it was because there were apples. Girls ran past them, calling for Mr. Shiolin, and the girls looked where they were running so quickly. The girls asked for autographs. They gave the prince a huge number of flowers and simply surrounded him. Ariana turned away and called the prince a narcissist. Xiaobai was surprised and asked if Ariana knew the prince. The girl said that Shiolin is the main heir of the Temple of Light and the youngest sword emperor in history. Therefore, Shiolin has always been popular. Ariana turned away and asked to quickly leave before they were noticed. But their plan did not come true, as the rose that Shiolin threw to her began to fall right in front of Ariana. The girl turned and asked if fame had really gone to the guy's head, since he dared to block her path. Shiolin said that he accidentally angered Lady Mitchell. He apologized and said that his hand just trembled. But there was something that interested Shiolin, that's why he didn't let the girls leave. The guy threw a rose at Xiaobai and asked what the name of this beautiful lady was. The guy stood with a rose in his hair and didn't understand what was going on. The girls saw Shiolin flirting with another girl and felt anger and despair. Ariana looked at Xiaobai and couldn't understand how something like this could happen to them. The guy reached for the rose, and the girls continued to look for flaws in her and condemn her. Shiolin got off his horse and said that only this girl caught his eye and he flies into the light like a moth. Xiaobai remembered Ariana telling him to keep his mouth shut as his voice remained masculine. He turned to Ariana when he saw the prince approaching and began mentally screaming for the girl to help him. But the white tiger and Ariana were eating watermelon and mentally telling the guy that he could handle it on his own. Shiolin came close and pulled Xiaobai towards him by the waist, and then he said that she was too beautiful. Ariana and Miao Miao choked on their watermelon when Prince Shiolin called the guy too handsome. The girls cried with indignation and did not understand why Prince Shiolin was trying to seduce such a scarecrow. The guy held Xiaobai's body close to him, and thought that her breasts were firm and round, like apples. He thought that this was exactly what he had been looking for all his life, and he imagined how he could snuggle up to her chest without any extra fabric. The prince touched someone else's cheek and thought that since sweet speeches and hugs did not work, then it was time to use a secret technique. Ariana and Miao Miao trembled with impatience and completely forgot that they wanted to eat watermelon. And Shiolin began to lean closer and closer to the disguised Xiaobai, continuing to press his body to himself. They looked into each other's eyes, and their noses were almost touching, their faces were so close. Xiaobai covered someone else's mouth with his hand. He frowned and ordered him to stop approaching him. Ariana and Miao Miao exhaled in disappointment and were very upset that Xiaobai was not kissed. But the girls, on the contrary, were very happy that the stranger stopped Prince Shiolin. The prince said that he could not even think that there were girls left who could resist him. He wanted to say that the girl amazed him, but then he realized that there was something wrong with her voice. Xiaobai escaped from someone else's grip. He looked menacingly at Shiolin and told him that he was a man, so the prince should keep his hands to himself. Prince Shiolin felt humiliated and deceived when he learned that the beauty turned out to be a man. And the girls were now even more upset than before when they realized that they had lost to the guy. Xiaobai took out the apples and said that he would go change clothes if the guy finished his games. Prince Shiolin was furious. Xiaobai humiliated the heir of the Temple of Light, and now he simply ran away. He took out his sword and used the technique when a huge knight appeared behind the blade of the sword. The ground around the prince began to fly apart and he shouted for the guy to come back immediately. Ariana became agitated and screamed for Prince Shiolin to pull himself together immediately. But the girl's cry had no effect, and Shiolin attacked the leaving guy, and the huge knight did the same. Xiaobai had a dark sword with him, so he was able to stop someone else's blow without even turning around. Xiao Bai looked over his shoulder angrily at Xiulin, and he continued to defend himself with one hand from someone else's sword. Afterwards, he told Prince Xiulin to remember that he was the one who attacked him first. Xiulin was shocked because this guy was able to stop his strongest blow using one hand. Xiao Bai turned to Xiulin completely and said that he was ready to have fun, but the prince recognized the sword. Now he was confused as he pointed at the guy's sword and started shouting that it was Yi Xiao Bai in front of him. Xiao Bai was surprised and asked how Xiulin knew his real name. The guy himself did not remember the prince. Ariana and the white tiger were also confused when it turned out that the two knew each other. Meanwhile, the weather outside was fine, and near the Mitchell's ward it was deserted. Inside, Mitchell Rodriguez greeted the High Bishop of the Temple of Light, and asked why he was here. It turned out that the man also could not ignore the discovery of a secret dimension. Mitchell Rodriguez laughed, and he thought that the news about Yi Xiao Bai had not yet reached the Temple of Light. The bishop believed that during the opening there should be all forces in the city, and it was unknown whether the old man would come from the mountain. Mitchell asked why the man remembered him, and the bishop said that although many years had passed, their enmity was not over. Rodriguez decided to take the chance and asked what exactly happened between them. The bishop said that 10 years ago he and Xiulin climbed the mountains. Xiulin had just become the Sword Emperor at that time. They sat at the table, and the man told the master to call his student so that the guys could fight. The master called Xiao Bai. The bishop regretted that he had taken Xiulin with him to the mountains. Xiao Bai left the house when he heard the master calling him and looked out uncertainly. The guy was cooking and asked what happened. The second thing the bishop regretted was that he allowed them to fight. Young Xiulin asked Xiao Bai to remember his name, because fighting him would be an honor for the guy. Yi Xiao Bai wiped his hands on his apron and asked him to fight quickly because his potatoes were burning. Xiulin told the boy to take the sword and under no circumstances get his weapon dirty with a greasy spatula. Yi Xiao Bai came closer and said that she was not fat at all. The boy started shaking the spatula and stained someone else's shirt. Xiulin was furious when he realized that his clothes now had grease stains on them. The men watched the children, and the bishop said that with the spatula the boy looked like a chef. The guy apologized to Xiulin and tried to wipe off the grease stains with his hand, but it didn't work out well. Xiao Bai's hand only rubbed the stains into huge ones, and now the entire shirt was completely ruined by grease. Xiao Bai said that he would try to wet his hands and remove the stains, but he shouted loudly for the guy to take the sword. The boy came with a sword and asked Xiulin to take off his shirt to clean it and then fight. But Xiulin was already attacking Xiao Bai and shouting at the boy to forget about his dirty clothes. Xiao Bai hesitantly turned to his master to understand what he should do. Master Bashing winked at his student and told him to show what he was capable of. Now Yi Xiao Bai was full of confidence. He gripped the sword with both hands and concentrated his spiritual energy. Then, during the fight, he released a lot of his spiritual power, lighting up the mountains. In that battle, Prince Xiulin quickly lost, and all his clothes were torn after their fight. Now Xiulin was an adult, but he had been waiting for the opportunity to fight again for 3,532 days. After these words, Xiao Bai finally remembered the guy. He was the same crying ghost. The girls were shocked because in the prince's autobiography it was written that he never cried. And then Xiao Bai recalled how the guy wet his pants and was forced to clean up. Xiulin was terribly angry. A lot of time has passed since then, and Prince Xiulin constantly trained with heavy weights. The guy trained his body in the water and spent a lot of time with dolphins and could swim faster than them. In addition, Xiulin did not forget to include running through the dark forest in his training. He could also calmly leave the girl alone in bed and leave, despite the fact that he was called. Prince Xiulin shouted that he was no longer the same little boy and jumped on Xiao Bai to attack from above. Xiao Bai didn't understand what the problem was and why Xiulin was so angry if he was telling the truth. The white tiger and Ariana were very worried about the guy, and the girl shouted for Xiao Bai to dodge someone else's blow. The guy looked at the enemy and saw that he was quickly approaching him. Xiulin flew at the guy, but all his anger disappeared when his head was filled with memories of the previous battle. He remembered very clearly and vividly the moment when Xiao Bai's spiritual power threw him away, tearing his clothes. Because of these memories, the prince again felt like that pitiful boy and tears appeared in his eyes. Xiao Bai took a step to the side and Prince Xiulin fell flat next to his feet and dropped his sword. Xiao Bai looked at the unconscious prince and said that he didn't even do anything. Ariana assumed that the prince was worried. At this moment, the guards appeared and saw that someone dared to harm Prince Shulin. Xiao Bai wanted to explain that he did nothing, but Ariana said it was useless. The girl ran forward and used her fire magic, and then she forbade the guards to approach. There was a small beam of flame in front of the men, but none of the guards were harmed by it. When the fire and smoke cleared, the men became worried and noticed that there was no one in front of them. There were no girls on the road, and Prince Shulin also disappeared, and no one saw where they disappeared. They ran away, and Xiao Bai asked why they took the prince. Ariana said they should be friends to avoid trouble. The girl turned around in confusion to ask Xiao Bai what that strange sound was, and she saw that Xiao Bai was simply dragging Shulin's body along the floor. Xiao Bai couldn't understand why the girl was looking at him like that. Due to this careless way of transferring the body, Shulin received many injuries, and they lost the chance for peace negotiations. They stood next to the prince's bed, and Xiao Bai said that he didn't think and just grabbed him as the girl asked. Their quarrel was interrupted by the sound of the door opening and two men who came to check on Shulin. The bishop of the Temple of Light pressed Shulin's wounded face and cried, asking how this happened to him. Mitchell Rodriguez approached his granddaughter and asked what happened. Ariana exhaled and said that there was a misunderstanding. The man listened to the girl and said that he was almost sure that they could not resolve everything peacefully. Yi Xiaobai walked up to the bishop and bowed. The guy apologized and said it was all his fault. The man was furious and was ready to tear Xiaobai into little pieces for what he did to the prince. The man wanted to teach the little scoundrel a lesson and rushed at Xiaobai with his fists. The guy remained standing in place. Mitchell shouted to the man that he did not advise him to act rashly because Yi Xiaobai was the sword god. The bishop froze in front of the guy. He pondered the new information about Yi Xiaobai's title and decided not to get into a fight. The man took Xiaobai's hands and said that they had not seen each other for a very long time. The guy doesn't remember knowing the man. The man said that he was a close friend of his master, and the Mitchell family could breathe out for a while. A maid appeared in the room. She called Mitchell Rodriguez and said that the top of the Association of Magicians had arrived. Rodriguez said that he had important guests, but he would like to introduce Xiaobai to them, and the man said goodbye to the guy. The Mitchells and Xiaobai headed out of the room, and the man waved after them kindly. When the company left, the doors closed behind them. The man dropped his friendliness. The bishop became absolutely serious and pondered his further actions, because Xiaobai was now the god of the sword. He turned to Shulin and asked why he got into a fight with someone many times stronger than himself. The man smiled and said that such an opponent could not be defeated by force, so they would have to find some kind of loophole. Xiaobai walked along the corridor. Miao Miao sat on his head and they admired the beautiful view from the window. Mitchell Rodriguez asked his granddaughter to keep a close eye on Xiaobai and not let him talk to anyone. Ariana asked why, but no one answered her because they were distracted by a pink light not far from the building. A huge beam of pink energy was shooting into the sky, and its source was in the forest not far from the mountain. Ariana was very happy and asked her grandfather if this was what she thought. And Mitchell Rodriguez said that the girl was right, and right now a secret dimension had opened before their eyes. Every 1,000 years, secret dimensions are opened on the Yulon continent, and the pink beam of light is directed into the sky. In secret dimensions you can find a variety of artifacts, such as stones, minerals, herbs, or weapons. Anyone who enters the secret dimension has the chance to gain power and glory, so it was a very popular event. Such places always attract people who strive for success and new heights. People run to the place where a passage to a secret dimension opens in huge numbers and everyone dreams of power. The guy almost reached the entrance to the secret dimension and joyfully shouted that he would be the first to get there. This man had dreamed of becoming a sword god all his life and was now confident that this would happen. But the next second the guy's skeleton returned from the other side, scaring the rest of the crowd. Lord Harris said that the dimension has not yet opened and anyone who rushes to immediately lose their life. Jinli, the king of the gnomes, also came. He said that he would quickly deal with all small competitors. Eston was the king of the elves. He said that all these people would be cannon fodder and only a few would survive. Jinli turned at the sound of the voice and saw many other elves next to the king. The dwarf king said that it infuriates him that Eston is always nearby, and the elf proposed to arrange a battle before the opening of the dimension. Mitchell Rodriguez said it would look ugly, but the king still have to look decent. Ordinary people realized that the entire top of the Sacred Council was assembled and were extremely serious. Lord Harris pointed to Mitchell and said that it seemed to him that he had lost some of his warriors. The man said that he was fine and that he already had suitable help nearby. Lord Harris hoped that the man did not mean Xiao Bai, and Jean Li said that only his warriors could help the old man. Mitchell Rodriguez screamed and introduced his future son-in-law. Warriors with firecrackers surrounded Ariana and Xiao Bai. Lord Harrison was about to cry when he saw Yi Xiao Bai go to help Mitchell Rodriguez. Jean Li saw that the guy had a white badge and laughed. Eston also grinned and said that the guy didn't even look savvy. Ariana was very embarrassed and began to pull her grandfather's mustache and say that Xiao Bai is not his son-in-law. Rodriguez was saying that maybe someday he would become one, when someone shouted that he was against this relationship. This man turned out to be the prince of the city, Elias. Estico said that Ariana belongs only to him. The girl felt irritated. She closed her eyes and told Estic that he did not belong here. But Estico said that this is still the territory of Elias, which means he has every right to be here. The prince of Elias approached Xiao Bai and told him that everyone here was obliged to obey his orders. But Yi Xiao Bai did not pay attention to the guy and noticed that something strange was happening in the sky, as if it was about to rain. Estico got very angry and started shouting that the guy had no right to ignore him and should get out of here altogether. Dark clouds in the sky thickened, and soon lightning appeared, accompanied by thunder. Jean Li took the axe tighter and asked if the demon god would appear soon. Aston ordered everyone to take positions. There were more and more lightning in the sky, and through the clouds it was impossible to see even a small piece of the sky. And then the sacred beasts appeared. The black dragon said that the secret dimension belongs to the dragon god. A phoenix, a leopard and a snake appeared on the clouds nearby, and the dragon told people not to meddle in the secret dimension. Mitchell became worried and did not understand when the dragon god returned to their world, and Harris noted that the chi was very powerful. Soon the clouds began to part, and the dragon god said that he would not like to kill weak insects. People watched in horror as the silhouette of a dragon god appeared in the sky among lightning and clouds. Lao Chu came out completely from the clouds and told the people that he was giving them one last chance to leave without getting hurt. The man looked down menacingly. The amount of lightning around him increased, and he ordered the people to run. People began to retreat and the man was glad that everything was going according to plan, and only with such a performance could he announce his return. Estek screamed in horror and grabbed his head, and Xiao Bai looked at the dragon god carefully. Lao Chu also noticed his gaze and it felt as if his soul had hurriedly left his body. The dragon god did not want to engage in a duel with the sword god because he did not want to lose in front of everyone. He hurried back to the cloud portal and ordered the rest of the sacred animals to leave immediately. The black dragon decided that the dragon god was embarrassed by the people, therefore, it was difficult for him to speak, and the dragon decided to help. Now Xiao Bai pointed at the sacred beasts and wanted to say something, but did not have time, because all four sacred beasts felt their souls leaving their bodies out of fear, and in order not to be near the god of the sword, they quickly obeyed the order of their god and disappeared into the portal. Mitchell was surprised that the dragon god had finally freed himself, but for some reason they decided to quickly leave. Jean Li asked if the others saw the change in the dragon god's expression, and Eston said that he looked toward Xiao Bai. Everyone turned their attention to the place where Xiao Bai and the prince of the holy city of Elias stood. Estek noticed increased attention to their persons when he moved away from his fright and asked what was the matter. Xiao Bai started clapping and said that everyone thinks that the prince drove away that terrible god. The guy was confused at first. And then he laughed loudly and proudly declared that he was the prince of the holy city of Elias and nothing could scare him. Eston and Jean Li appreciated how Xiao Bai turned all his attention to Estico, and they decided that the guy would cope with the test. Eston ordered one of his subordinates to keep an eye on Xiao Bai once they were in the dungeon. Jean Li also approached one of his gnomes and told him to keep a close eye on the boy. Finally, someone shouted that a portal to a secret dimension was opening, and everyone felt a sense of joyful anticipation. A seal appeared on the ground, which meant that the entrance was completely open and everyone hurried to go inside. People ran in crowds into the pink beam of light and immediately disappeared. Everyone wanted to get into the dungeon as quickly as possible. Estek approached Ariana and offered to lead the girl to the entrance to the secret dimension. But the girl said that she did not need his protection. She took Xiaobai's hand, and she and the white tiger walked ahead. Estek was offended and could barely hold back his tears. He thought about how he would deal with the guy right now. Jinli and Lord Harris led their soldiers behind them, heading towards the entrance to the secret dimension. The bandits who had previously been robbed by Xiaobai in the city also came to the place where the secret dimension was opened. The man suggested going to the shower first, but his partner yelled at him for such a stupid idea and reminded him of the Dark Lord. The bandits said that the Dark Lord gave them a simple task, they just had to keep a close eye on the guy. The bandit hoped that his partner would cope with this, but people continued to enter the portal.